Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Nightmare Narratives. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Luther Grimwald, and I've been a park ranger in these West Virginia mountains for 18 years. Folks around here call me Ranger Grim, and that suits me just fine. I've seen bears tear apart campsites, found lost hikers half dead from cold, and tracked problem animals through some of the darkest places you can imagine. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what happened in Blood Creek Hollow during October of 1979. I wasn't always a ranger. Used to work the coal mines with my brother Danny until that black day in '73 when the roof came down. Danny didn't make it out. I did, but something inside me broke along with my ribs and collarbone. Couldn't stand being underground after that. The forest called to me instead, wide open sky, fresh air, and plenty of room to breathe. The Monongahela National Forest covers nearly 1 million acres, but my section is Blood Creek Hollow, about 60 miles from the nearest hospital. It's rough country, deep valleys carved between steep ridges, thick with mountain laurel and rhododendron that'll scratch you bloody if you're not careful. Old Cherokee used to tell stories about these hills, something about cursed wolf spirits they called Kitawa. Most folks just laughed at those tales. I sure did. Radio doesn't work too good down in the hollow. Dead zones everywhere because of the mountains. When something goes wrong out here, you're pretty much on your own until you can hike back to higher ground. That's just how it is, and that's how I liked it. Quiet, peaceful, just me in the woods. I'd handled my share of problem animals over the years. Black bears mostly, sometimes a rabid fox or raccoon. Had to put down 3 bears that got too comfortable around campers, and I'd tracked more than 200 others back into the deep forest where they belonged. The state was even talking about bringing wolves back to the area, part of some big conservation program. I knew the drill: tranquilizer guns, GPS collars, working with the Department of Agriculture when livestock got hit. Never believed in monsters, though. When old-timers down at Murphy's General Store would get to drinking and start talking about werewolves in the mountains, I'd just shake my head and buy another coffee. Problem dogs. I'd tell them. Maybe some big coyotes that wandered down from Canada. But werewolves? Come on now. October came early that year, with frost warnings before Halloween and a bitter wind that cut right through your jacket. The leaves had barely started turning when Ezra Whitlock called the ranger station, voice all shaky and strange. "Luther, you need to get up here to my place. Something got into my cattle." "How many head you lose, Ezra?" "7. But Luther," his voice dropped to almost a whisper, "you ain't gonna believe how I found them. I'd seen plenty of predator kills. Bears, wild dogs, even mountain lions, though they're supposed to be extinct around here. Animals kill to eat, and they do it efficient. Quick throat bite, drag the carcass somewhere safe, feed and move on. That's nature. What I found at Ezra's farm wasn't nature. 7 prize cattle, each one worth more than I made in 2 months, were scattered across his lower pasture like broken toys. But they weren't just killed, they were arranged. 3 of them were stacked on top of each other in a perfect triangle. 2 more were hanging from tree branches that should have been too weak to hold that much weight. The other 2 were torn completely in half, their pieces placed exactly 20 feet apart. What in God's name? I walked around the scene 3 times, taking pictures with my old Polaroid camera. The smell hit me last, not just blood and death, but something else. Something wild and angry that made my skin crawl. "Found them this morning around dawn," Ezra said, staying close to his truck. "But Luther, listen to this part. I heard the killing happen around midnight. Lasted maybe 10 minutes. 10 minutes for 7 full-grown cattle. I knelt down next to the biggest bull, a Angus that probably weighed 1,500 pounds. The bite marks on its throat were massive, bigger than any dog or wolf I'd ever seen. Whatever did this had jaws like a bear trap and the strength to flip cattle like pancakes. That's when I noticed the quiet. Blood Creek Hollow is never quiet. There's always something: birds calling, squirrels chattering, insects buzzing. But standing in that field, I couldn't hear a single living thing except me and Ezra breathing. Even the wind had stopped. "You hear that?" I asked him. "Hear what?" "Exactly." I spent the next 3 days collecting evidence like I was supposed to. Took measurements, gathered samples, set up trail cameras around the property. Standard livestock predation investigation, just like they taught us. But nothing about this felt standard. The bite marks were too big and too deep. I'd seen what bears could do, and this was different. Bears have smaller teeth, more spread apart. These looked like something with a mouth full of railroad spikes. I sent photos to the state wildlife office and got back a form letter about unusual canine activity and possible hybrid wolf dog. My trail cameras kept malfunctioning. I'd set them up in the evening with fresh batteries, and by morning, they'd be dead. Not just low batteries completely drained, like something had sucked the power right out of them. 3 different cameras, 3 different brands, same result every time. The forest stayed quiet too. No bird songs in the morning, no owl calls at night. I'd been working these woods for almost 20 years, and I'd never seen the wildlife just disappear like that. It was like every animal for miles around had packed up and left. That's when Susan Hayes got involved. Susan was a good ranger, maybe 5 years younger than me, worked the section north of Blood Creek. She had a wildlife biology degree from West Virginia University and knew more about animal behavior than anyone I'd met. When I called her about the Whitlock incident, she drove down the same day. "Luther, I've been getting reports too," she said, spreading out a map on the hood of my truck. 3 farms in my area hit in the last week. Same kind of damage, animals torn apart and arranged in patterns. Patterns? Circles, triangles, sometimes just lined up in rows. It's like whatever's doing this is trying to send a message. We drove out to examine the other farms together. The Kowalski place had lost 12 sheep, all of them arranged in a perfect circle around their water trough. The Morrison farm was even worse. 15 head of cattle killed, and their bodies dragged into the shape of a 5-pointed star in their biggest field. "This is impossible," Susan said, taking measurements. "Look at this." She pointed to drag marks in the dirt. "These cattle weigh over 1,000 pounds each. Whatever moved them had to be incredibly strong. Or there were a lot of them working together. Maybe. But look at this." She showed me paw prints in the soft earth near the barn. They were huge, bigger than my hand, and shaped wrong for any dog or wolf. The claws were too long, and there were only 4 toes instead of 5. But here's the part that still gives me nightmares. About every 20 feet, the paw prints just stopped. And in their place were human footprints. Bare human feet, size 12 or 13, with toes that ended in points like claws. "Susan," I said quietly, "what walks on 4 legs sometimes and 2 legs other times?" She didn't answer right away, just stared at those prints like they might rearrange themselves into something that made sense. "I don't know," she finally said, "but I think we're going to find out." That night, the first person died. Jebediah McClure lived alone in a cabin about 2 miles up Blood Creek from the Whitlock farm. He was 73 years old, kept to himself mostly, raised a few chickens and grew vegetables in a little garden. Nice old man who'd wave when you drove past, always ready with a cup of coffee and a story about the old days. The state police found him the next morning after his nephew came by to check on him. Jeb's front door was ripped, clean off its hinges, not broken, but ripped away like it was made of paper. The cabin was destroyed inside, furniture thrown around, walls clawed and gouged. They found Jeb outside, about 50 yards into the woods. What was left of him? I got called in because it happened on Forest Service land. By the time I arrived, there were state troopers everywhere, yellow tape around the whole area, and a detective from Charleston asking questions I couldn't answer. "Mr. Grimwald, what kind of animal could do this?" Detective Barnes was young, probably didn't know a bear track from a house cat, but he was trying to do his job. I looked at what remained of Jebediah McClure and felt something cold settle in my stomach. The old man had been torn apart, but not eaten. Pieces of him were scattered around like someone had been playing with a rag doll. And there were those same massive paw prints everywhere, mixed with the human footprints that made no sense. "I honestly don't know," I told the detective. "I've never seen anything like this. Could it be a bear? Maybe a really big one? Bears don't rip doors off houses. And they don't." I pointed to claw marks gouged into a big oak tree, about 12 feet off the ground. "They don't climb that high to mark territory." The detective wrote something in his notebook, but I could see he was as lost as I was. That night, I couldn't sleep, kept thinking about those footprints that changed from animal to human and back again. Kept hearing Ezra Whitlock's voice saying the cattle killing took 10 minutes. Kept seeing Jeb McClure's cabin with the door ripped away like it was nothing. Around 3 in the morning, I heard howling. Not regular wolf howls I'd heard recordings from Yellowstone in Canada. This was different, deeper, and there was something almost human about it, like someone trying to imitate a wolf but not getting it quite right. The howling came from multiple directions at once. North, south, east, west, like we were surrounded. And it went on for 20 minutes, stopping and starting, sometimes close, sometimes far away. I grabbed my rifle and stepped out onto my porch, but the sound stopped the second I opened the door. The forest went dead quiet again, like someone had hit a switch. That's when I knew we weren't dealing with normal animals. That's when I started to believe the old Cherokee stories might be true. Susan and I started patrolling together after Jeb's death. Neither of us wanted to admit we were scared. But there's safety in numbers when you're dealing with something you don't understand. We'd meet at the ranger station each morning, plan our route, and head out in my truck with extra ammunition and a radio that worked about half the time. The attacks kept happening. Every few days, another farm hit, more livestock killed and arranged in those impossible patterns. But it was escalating. The animals were getting bolder, coming closer to houses, striking during daylight hours. The Hendricks family lived in a little house near Possum Ridge, about 15 miles from Blood Creek. Tom Hendricks worked construction in town, and his wife Mary ran a small daycare for local kids. They had 3 children of their own, ages 6, 8, and 10. On a Thursday morning in late October, Tom called the sheriff's office in a panic. Something had tried to break into their house during the night. Susan and I got there around noon. The house looked like it had been attacked by a tornado. Every window on the ground floor was broken, the front porch was torn apart, and there were claw marks gouged deep into the siding. They were trying to get inside, Tom told us, his hands shaking as he lit another cigarette. Mary and the kids were upstairs, and I was downstairs with my shotgun. Something was throwing itself against the door over and over, howling and snarling like nothing I ever heard. How many were there? Susan asked. I don't know. Sounded like a dozen, maybe more. They surrounded the house, and every time I'd fire out one window, they'd hit another side of the building. Mary Hendricks was inside packing clothes, getting ready to take the kids to her sister's place in Charleston. She was pale and jumpy, spinning around every time a floorboard creaked. I saw them, she whispered when we asked what happened. From the upstairs window, they were standing up like people, but they were wolves. Big as horses, with glowing eyes and teeth like knives. The kids wouldn't talk at all, just huddled together on the couch, staring at nothing. We found tracks all around the house, hundreds of them. The same impossible prints that changed from animal to human and back. But there was something new this time. Tool marks in the wood around the windows, like someone had been using crowbars or hammers to try and break in. Animals don't use tools, Susan said quietly. These aren't animals, I replied. That afternoon, we drove up to see Thomas Nightwind. He was Cherokee, maybe 80 years old, lived in a little trailer up on Spruce Mountain. Most people thought he was crazy because he still practiced the old ways, still believed in spirits and curses and things modern folks had forgotten. I'd never paid much attention to his stories before. Now I was ready to listen. You're dealing with the Kitawa, he said before we even told him why we'd come. I felt them wake up 3 weeks ago. The forest told me they were hunting again. Mr. Nightwind, Susan said carefully. What exactly are the Kitawa? The old man invited us inside for coffee. His trailer was small but clean, filled with handmade crafts and old photographs. He moved slowly, but his eyes were sharp and bright. Long time ago, before white people came to these mountains, there was a Cherokee warrior named Runs with Wolves. He was proud, strong, feared no enemy. But he was also cruel, especially to his own people. He'd steal from the weak, take food from children, beat his wives. Thomas sat down across from us, his weathered hands wrapped around a coffee mug. The elders warned him many times, but he wouldn't listen. So they went to the medicine man, asked for justice. The medicine man called on the wolf spirits to punish Runs with Wolves. What kind of punishment? I asked. They cursed him to become what he acted like a savage beast. But not just him. The curse spread to his children, and their children, down through the generations. They became the Kiowa spirit wolves that hunt in packs, killing for pleasure instead of food. Susan leaned forward. You're saying these are actual werewolves? I'm saying there are things in this world that don't fit in your science books, young lady. The Kiowa sleep for long periods, sometimes decades. But when they wake up, they're hungry. Not for food, for violence, for terror, for the screams of their victims. How do you stop them? I asked. Thomas looked out his window at the darkening sky. Silver weapons blessed by someone pure of heart. Stakes cut from mountain ash trees, and you have to find their den during daylight, when they're weakest. Where do they den? Underground, old mine shafts, deep caves, anywhere dark and protected. But be careful, they're not just animals. They think like people, plan like people, work together like people. And they hate anyone who threatens their hunting ground. We thanked Thomas and headed back down the mountain just as the sun was setting. Neither one of us said much during the drive, but we were both thinking the same thing. If the old man was right, we were in serious trouble. That night, the Kiowa took their first child. 8-year-old Billy Morrison disappeared from his bedroom while his parents slept 20 feet away. His window was open, screen torn out, and there were claw marks on the sill. Billy's bed was covered in coarse black hair that didn't match any animal I knew. The search lasted 3 days. State police, volunteers, search and rescue teams from 3 counties. We combed every inch of forest within 10 miles of the Morrison farm. Found plenty of tracks, the same impossible prints we'd been seeing everywhere, but no sign of Billy. On the 3rd day, we found his jacket hanging from a tree branch 12 feet off the ground. It was shredded, covered in blood, but there was no body underneath. That's when I realized these things weren't just killing for fun anymore. They were collecting trophies. And that meant Billy Morrison was probably still alive somewhere, waiting for whatever they planned to do with him. I made a decision that night that probably saved my life, even though it felt like cowardice at the time. I went home, loaded every gun I owned, and called my ex-wife in Virginia. Sarah, I need you to stay with your sister for a few weeks. Luther, what's wrong? Just trust me on this. Don't come back to West Virginia until I call and say it's safe. You're scaring me. Good. Stay scared and stay away. But I couldn't run. This was my forest, my responsibility. Whatever was hunting in these mountains, it was up to me and Susan to stop it. We just had no idea how many of them there were, or how close they were watching us. The next morning, Susan didn't show up at the ranger station. I waited until noon, then drove to her cabin on the north side of the forest. Her truck was in the driveway, but the front door was standing wide open. Inside, the place was destroyed, furniture overturned, windows broken, claw marks covering every wall. But no blood, no body. No sign of Susan, except her ranger hat sitting in the middle of the kitchen table, placed there like someone wanted me to find it. They had taken her alive, just like Billy Morrison. I called the state police, but Detective Barnes just told me to wait for backup. Don't go into those woods alone, Grimwald. Whatever you're dealing with, it's too dangerous for one person. I hung up the phone and loaded my truck with everything I could think of. Rifle, shotgun, pistol, flare gun, first aid kit, rope, flashlights. At Murphy's General Store, I bought every box of ammunition they had and asked old Murphy if he had any silver jewelry. Silver? He looked at me like I'd lost my mind. What you need silver for? Just humor me. He sold me his late wife's silver necklace and a set of silver-plated serving spoons. I melted them down in my kitchen that afternoon, poured the silver into bullet molds I'd borrowed from my neighbor. If Thomas Nightwind was right about silver weapons, I wanted to be prepared. I spent the rest of the day hiking through the forest, following the trail of massive paw prints that led deeper and deeper into Blood Creek Hollow. The tracks were easy to follow. They didn't seem to care about hiding their path anymore. If anything, they were leaving an obvious trail, like they wanted me to follow. As the sun started setting, I realized why. They were herding me toward the old Black Rock mine. Black Rock had been abandoned since the 1950 seconds, one of those small operations that played out when the easy coal was gone. The main shaft went down about 300 feet, with side tunnels spreading out like spider legs. It was exactly the kind of place Thomas Nightwind had described, dark, protected, underground. The howling started just as I reached the mine entrance. Not the almost human sounds I'd heard before. This was pure animal rage, echoing up from deep underground. And mixed with the howling, I could hear something else. Human voices, crying for help. Susan and Billy were down there, still alive. I tied a rope around a tree and rappelled down the main shaft, flashlight in one hand, rifle in the other. The smell hit me about 50 feet down, wet fur, rotting meat, and something else that reminded me of the reptile house at the zoo. The main tunnel branched off in 4 directions. I followed the sounds, trying to move quietly on the broken rock and old railroad ties. Every few yards, I'd find more evidence: human clothing torn to shreds, silver jewelry that had been bent and twisted, scratch marks on the tunnel walls. The crying was coming from a side tunnel about 200 feet from the main shaft. I crept forward, trying not to think about what might be behind me in the dark. What I found in that tunnel changed everything I thought I knew about the world. There were 8 of them. 8 creatures that stood somewhere between wolves and humans, covered in coarse black fur, with glowing yellow eyes and mouths full of teeth like broken glass. They were huge, 7 or 8 feet tall when standing upright, but they moved on both 2 legs and 4 with equal ease. Susan and Billy were alive, tied to support posts with heavy chains. Both conscious, both terrified, but alive. 3 other people were there too, adults I didn't recognize, probably taken from other attacks I hadn't heard about. But here's the part that still haunts me. The creatures weren't just guarding their prisoners. They were talking to them. Not growling or snarling. Talking. In English. "The ranger will come soon," one of them said in a voice like gravel in a blender. "When he does, you'll watch him die before we take you to the deep tunnels." "Please," Susan whispered. "Just let the boy go. He's just a child. Children taste better when they're frightened." Another creature replied, and they all made a sound that might have been laughter. I had 12 bullets made from melted silver and 8 targets. The math wasn't good, especially since I'd never shot at anything that could shoot back with claws and teeth. But I was out of time and options. I stepped into the tunnel with my rifle raised and started shooting. The first bullet hit the biggest creature center mass, and it went down like I'd hit it with lightning. The silver worked exactly like Thomas Nightwind said it would. The thing didn't just fall, it seemed to dissolve, like smoke in the wind. The others reacted faster than I thought possible. 2 of them came at me on 4 legs, moving like giant wolves but thinking like people. They tried to flank me, 1 from each side, while the others circled around to cut off my escape. I got the second one with a shot to the head, but the third one hit me before I could work the bolt. Claws like railroad spikes raked across my chest, tearing through my jacket and shirt like they were made of tissue paper. The pain was unbelievable, but adrenaline kept me moving. Susan was screaming my name, telling me to run, but I couldn't leave her and the others. I rolled away from the creature's second swipe and put a silver bullet through its heart. 5 left. That's when they stopped trying to kill me and started trying to capture me alive. The remaining creatures spread out, moving in perfect coordination, like they were reading each other's minds. They wanted to take me alive so I could watch while they killed the prisoners slowly. I could see it in their eyes: intelligence, cruelty, and patience. But they made one mistake. They underestimated how much damage a desperate man could do with the right ammunition. I had 9 silver bullets left and 5 targets. I made every shot count. The fight lasted maybe 3 minutes, but it felt like hours. By the time it was over, it was bleeding from a dozen wounds. My rifle was empty, and the tunnel was filled with dissolving creatures that had once been human beings. I cut Susan and the others loose with my knife, and we all climbed out of that mine like the devil himself was chasing us. Maybe he was. But we weren't safe yet. As we reached the surface, I could hear more howling in the distance. The pack was bigger than just 8 creatures, and the survivors knew their den had been discovered. I set off 3 flares and threw them down the main shaft, then used dynamite from my truck to collapse the entrance. If there were more of them down there, they'd have to find another way out. The howling stopped. 6 months later, I still wake up some nights hearing those voices in the mine tunnel. Not the growling and snarling you'd expect from wild animals, but actual human speech coming from mouths full of fangs. The official report listed the whole thing as a rabid coyote pack that had been eliminated. Detective Barnes didn't ask too many questions about the collapsed mine shaft or how 5 people had been chained up in tunnels that were supposed to be empty. Sometimes it's easier to file paperwork than to try explaining the impossible. Susan transferred to a different forest in Virginia. She sends me Christmas cards but never talks about what happened in Blood Creek Hollow. Billy Morrison recovered physically, but his parents moved to Florida and never came back to West Virginia. Can't say I blame them, I stayed. Somebody has to watch these mountains, and after what I've seen, I know the job requires more than just checking hunting licenses and maintaining hiking trails. I carry silver bullets now, and wooden stakes cut from mountain ash trees. My truck has a crucifix hanging from the rearview mirror, blessed by 3 different preachers. The forest is quiet again, but it's a different kind of quiet. Not the peaceful silence I used to love, but the watchful quiet of comment, something holding its breath. Birds and small animals have started coming back, but they stay away from certain areas. They know things I'm still learning. Thomas Nightwind died that winter, peaceful in his sleep. Before he passed, he gave me a leather pouch filled with blessed silver bullets and told me there were other places in these mountains where old curses still slept. The Kiowa were just one pack, he said. There are others. 3 weeks ago, I got reports of livestock killings 50 miles south, near the Virginia border. Cattle found torn apart and arranged in patterns that made no sense. The state wildlife office sent me to investigate. I found the same massive paw prints, the same claw marks 12 feet up on the trees, the same dead silence in the forest where nothing would sing or call. But this time, I was ready. This time, I knew what I was hunting. If you're planning to camp in the Appalachian Mountains, especially during the new moon when the darkness runs deepest, remember this story. Stay on marked trails. Don't wander into areas where the forest goes quiet. And if you hear howling that sounds almost human, don't investigate. Get in your car and drive away as fast as you can. Because some hunts never really end. They just move to new hunting grounds. And sometimes, late at night when the wind is blowing through Blood Creek Hollow, I can still hear howling echoing up from deep underground, where sealed mine shafts run deeper than anyone ever mapped. The dynamite didn't kill them all, it just made them angry. My name is Luther Grimwald, and I've been hunting monsters in these mountains for over 20 years now. I'm still here. They're still here too. And every night, we're all waiting to see who makes the first move. My name is Caleb Thornfield, and I've pulled bodies from these mountains for over 2 decades. 22 years of working search and rescue in the Cherokee National Forest, and I thought I'd seen every way the wilderness could kill a person. Hypothermia, falls, bear attacks, getting lost in a blizzard. I dealt with them all. But what happened at Devil's Knob Peak in February of 1983 changed everything I believed about these mountains. I was 51 then, a former military survival instructor who'd found his calling in the Appalachian wilderness. My Cherokee grandmother used to tell stories about the old days, about spirits that lived in the deep places where the sun never reached. I always figured those were just tales to keep kids from wandering too far into the woods. Cannibalism was ancient history, not modern reality. That's what I told myself anyway. The call came in on a Tuesday morning during the worst blizzard I'd ever seen. 6 college students from Knoxville had been hiking the Devil's Knob Trail when the storm hit. They were 4 days overdue, and the roads were blocked by avalanches. No way to get vehicles up there, and the weather was too rough for helicopters. "We need boots on the ground, Caleb," my supervisor told me over the crackling radio. "You know those caves better than anyone." I did know them. I'd been rappelling into limestone caves since I was a teenager, pulling out lost hikers and fallen climbers. The cave system under Devil's Knob was massive, tunnels that went for miles underground, some of them dropping hundreds of feet into darkness. It was dangerous even in good weather. In a blizzard like this, it was a death trap, but 6 kids were missing, and their families were counting on us. I gathered my team at the ranger station. Dr. Patricia Redhawk, our medic, had driven up from Gatlinburg despite the roads. Marcus Longbow, our best tracker, brought his search dog, a German shepherd named Scout. Billy, Crowfoot, volunteered to come along. He was a local mountain climber who knew the area almost as well as I did. The student's last known position was here. I pointed to the map, tapping a spot near the cave entrance. Trail leads right to Devil's Knob. If they took shelter in the caves when the storm hit, that's where we'll find them. Patricia frowned at the weather report. Temperatures dropping to 20 below tonight. If they've been out there 4 days. Then, we better move fast, I said. We loaded our packs with everything we'd need. Ropes, flares, emergency medical supplies, enough food and water for 3 days. The wind was howling outside, rattling the windows of the station. Snow was falling so thick you couldn't see 10 feet in any direction. As we suited up, old Ezekiel Darkwater shuffled into the station. He was a mountain man who lived alone in a cabin about 5 miles from Devil's Knob. Folks said he was crazy, but he knew these mountains better than anyone alive. "You boys ain't going up to the knob, are you?" he asked, his eyes wild and darting. "Got missing hikers, Zeke," I told him, 6 college kids. He grabbed my arm with a grip stronger than you'd expect from someone his age. "Don't go in them caves, Caleb. Not in winter. Not when the hunger spirit's awake." "Hunger spirit," Billy laughed. "Come on, old man. It's 1983, not 1883. Ezekiel's face went dark. "You laugh now, boy, but them caves got a history. Folks got trapped up there in the winter of 1847. Whole wagon train, snowed in for 3 months. When spring came and they dug 'em out." He shook his head. "Some things are better left buried." I'd heard the stories. Everyone around here had. A group of settlers had gotten trapped in the caves during a brutal winter. When the snow melted, searchers found evidence that some of them had turned to cannibalism to survive. Local Cherokee had always said the place was cursed after that something evil had awakened there. But stories were just stories. Right now, 6 kids were out there in the cold, and we were their only hope. "We appreciate the warning, Zeke," I said, gently pulling my arm free, "but we've got a job to do." The old man's eyes filled with something that looked like pity. "Then God help you, Caleb Thornfield. God help you all." The hike to Devil's Knob took us 3 hours through knee-deep snow. The wind cut through our gear like knives, and the temperature kept dropping. Scout, Marcus's dog, stayed close to his heels instead of ranging ahead like he usually did. Even the animals could sense something was wrong up here. When we reached the cave entrance, the first thing I noticed was the silence. The wind should have been screaming across the rocks, but here it was dead calm. The temperature had dropped at least 20 degrees from what it was at the base of the mountain. Our breath came out in thick clouds that seemed to hang in the air longer than they should have. "Look at this," Patricia called out, kneeling by some tracks in the snow. I came over to see. Boot prints, definitely. Multiple sets, heading straight for the cave mouth. But there was something wrong with them. They started out normal, 6 different sets of hiking boots, just like you'd expect from a group of college kids. But as they got closer to the cave, they got weird. Some of the prints looked like they'd been made by bare feet. Others showed claw marks instead of boot treads. "Must be the wind," Billy said, but his voice sounded uncertain. "Blowing snow around, making the tracks look funny." Marcus was trying to get his radio working, but all we got was static mixed with something that sounded almost like screaming. Scout whined and pressed against his legs, hackles raised. "Compasses are spinning," Patricia reported, tapping her instrument. "All of them." I checked mine. The needle was spinning in circles, like it couldn't decide which way was north. In 22 years of mountain rescue, I'd never seen anything like it. The cave mouth yawned in front of us like a giant's mouth. It was bigger than I remembered, at least 15 feet high and 20 feet wide. Icicles hung down like teeth, and somewhere deep inside, we could hear water dripping. But there was another sound too, something I couldn't quite identify. It was almost like breathing, but too deep and too slow to be human. "Hello," I called into the darkness. "This is Cherokee National Forest Search and Rescue. If anyone can hear me, call out." My voice echoed back strangely, like the cave was much bigger inside than it should be. For a moment, I thought I heard something else mixed in with the echo, a low, hungry sound that made my skin crawl. "Did you hear that?" Patricia whispered. "Hear what?" I thought I heard. "Never mind. Let's get the lights set up." We pulled out our powerful lanterns and aimed them into the cave. The beams seemed to get swallowed up by the darkness, only showing us about 30 feet into the tunnel. But that was enough to see the first body. She was hanging from the ceiling about 20 feet in, suspended by what looked like climbing rope. A young woman, maybe 19 or 20, wearing a University of Tennessee sweatshirt, but something was terribly wrong with the way she was positioned. No one hangs themselves upside down. "Jesus Christ," Billy breathed. I grabbed my rope and rappelling gear. Patricia, stay here and keep trying the radio. Billy, Marcus, you're with me. We rappelled down into the cave, our lights cutting through the darkness. As we got closer to the body, the wrongness of it became more obvious. The girl wasn't just hanging upside down, she'd been drained of blood. Her skin was paper white, and there were puncture wounds on her neck and wrists, like something had been feeding on her. But the worst part was her face. Her eyes were wide open, staring at nothing, and her mouth was twisted in a scream of pure terror. Whatever had killed her, she'd seen it coming. Cut her down, I told Marcus. Careful now. As we lowered the body, I noticed scratches on the cave walls around where she'd been hanging. Deep gouges in the limestone, like something with very long claws had been climbing around up there. The scratches were too big to be from any animal I knew about. That's when Scout started barking. Not his normal bark. This was different. Desperate. Terrified. I looked up to see the dog backing away from a side tunnel I hadn't noticed before. His ears were flat against his head, and he was making a low whining sound in his throat. From deep in that tunnel came an answering sound. A howl that was almost human but not quite. It echoed through the cave system, seeming to come from everywhere at once. The sound went on for at least 10 seconds, rising and falling like a siren. When it finally stopped, the silence that followed was somehow worse than the noise had been. "We need to get out of here," Marcus whispered. "Right now." But I was looking at the body we'd just cut down. This girl had been dead for at least 2 days, but she'd been hung up there recently, which meant something was still down here in the caves with us. Something that was smart enough to arrange bodies like trophies. "There are 5 more kids down here somewhere," I said. "We can't leave until we find them." Another howl echoed through the tunnels, closer this time. Scout was cowering behind Marcus now, shaking like a leaf. I clicked my radio, praying it would work. "Patricia, do you copy?" Static, then her voice, faint and distorted. "Caleb, something's wrong up here. The snow. It's moving." The radio went dead. We were on our own now, deep underground with something that hunted people for sport. But those kids were still out there somewhere, and I wasn't leaving without them, even if it killed me. The tunnel twisted deeper into the mountain, and with each step, the wrongness got stronger. Our lights showed scratch marks on every surface now, walls, ceiling, even the floor. Some of them were fresh, cutting through older marks like something had been sharpening its claws down here for years. We found the second body in a side chamber, about 100 yards from the first. This one was a young man, maybe 21, and he'd been partially eaten. I won't describe it in detail, but it was clear that whatever had killed him had used tools to butcher the body. The cuts were too clean and organized to be from an animal. "Look at this," Billy whispered, pointing to the ground around the body. Footprints in the cave dust. But these weren't human feet. They were at least 18 inches long, with what looked like claws at the end of each toe. The stride length suggested something that walked upright but was much taller than any person. Marcus was getting more and more agitated. Scout refused to go any further, so we'd had to leave him tied up near the entrance. The dog's whining had followed us for the first 50 yards, then stopped completely. That worried me more than the bodies. "We should mark our path," I said, pulling out chalk to make arrows on the walls. "Don't want to get lost down here." But when I looked back at the arrow I'd just drawn, it was gone. The wall was smooth limestone, like I'd never touched it. "Did you see me mark that wall?" I asked Billy. "What wall?" "You haven't marked anything." I stared at him. I knew I'd drawn an arrow, but Billy seemed genuinely confused. Either I was losing my mind, or something down here was messing with our perceptions. We kept going deeper. The tunnel branched and split, creating a maze of passages that seemed to go on forever. According to my map, we should have been at the back of the cave system by now, but the tunnels just kept going. It was like the mountain was bigger on the inside than the outside. That's when we heard the voices. "Help us." It was a girl's voice, echoing from somewhere ahead. "Please, we're trapped." We ran toward the sound, our lights bouncing wildly. The voice led us through a series of tight passages that opened into a huge chamber. Our lights couldn't even reach the ceiling or the far walls. "Where are you?" I shouted. "Here, over here." But the voice seemed to come from a different direction now. We spread out, searching the chamber. Billy found something that made him curse loudly. "Caleb, get over here!" In a corner of the chamber, someone had built a nest. It was made of branches, bones, and pieces of clothing. Human clothing. And scattered around it were more bones than I wanted to count. Some of them were old, bleached white by time. Others still had scraps of meat attached. "How long has this thing been living down here?" Billy asked. Before I could answer, the voices started again. But this time there were more of them, and they weren't calling for help anymore. They were laughing, a dozen different voices, all laughing at the same time, and none of them sounded quite human. The laughter echoed through the chamber, bouncing off walls we couldn't see, creating a sound that seemed to come from inside our own heads. Marcus dropped his light, and when it hit the ground, the bulb shattered, leaving us with 2 working flashlights. "We're leaving," I said, "right now." But when we turned to go back the way we'd come, the passage was gone. The wall was solid limestone, like there had never been an opening there at all. "That's impossible," Billy said, running his hands over the stone. "We just came through here. I checked my map and compass, but the compass was still spinning uselessly, and the map showed we were somehow outside the known cave system. According to the surveyed charts, this chamber didn't exist." That's when the temperature dropped. Not gradually, all at once, like someone had opened a freezer door. Our breath came out in clouds so thick we could barely see through them, and frost started forming on the cave walls. From somewhere in the darkness above us came a new sound, scraping, like something very large was moving across the ceiling. I aimed my light upward, and for just a second, I saw it. It was hanging upside down about 40 feet above us, gripping the rock with fingers that were too long and too thin to be human. The thing was huge, at least 11 feet tall, with skin that looked like it had been stretched over a skeleton that was too big for it. Its face was all wrong, with eyes that reflected our light like a cat's, and a mouth full of teeth that were definitely not made for eating plants. When our eyes met, it smiled. And that smile was the most terrifying thing I'd ever seen, because it was intelligent. This wasn't just some mindless monster. It was something that enjoyed what it did. Then it dropped from the ceiling. We ran. I don't remember deciding to run. One second we were staring at that thing, and the next we were sprinting through the darkness, our remaining lights cutting wild paths through the air. Behind us, we could hear it moving, not chasing us exactly, but following, playing with us. The passages seemed to shift and change as we ran. Tunnels that had been there seconds before vanished, and new ones appeared. It was like the cave itself was alive, rearranging itself to keep us trapped. We ran for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Finally, Marcus stumbled and fell, and we all stopped to catch our breath in a small chamber that I didn't remember seeing before. "What was that thing?" Billy gasped. Before I could answer, we heard Marcus scream. Something had grabbed him from behind and was dragging him into a crack in the wall that was barely wide enough for a person. I lunged forward and caught his hand, but whatever had him was incredibly strong. Marcus's eyes were wide with terror as he was pulled into the darkness. "Don't let it take me," he screamed. But my grip wasn't strong enough. His hand slipped from mine, and he disappeared into the crack. His screams echoed for a few seconds, then stopped abruptly. Billy and I were alone now, deep underground with something that was hunting us for sport. And I was beginning to understand that this wasn't just some unusual animal. This was something much older and much more dangerous, something that had been waiting in these caves for a very long time. Billy and I huddled together in the small chamber, our single remaining flashlight creating a weak circle of light around us. Everything outside that circle was pure darkness, and we both knew something was moving out there. "Tell me you've got a plan," Billy whispered. I was thinking about what old Ezekiel had said. The hunger spirit. The stories my Cherokee grandmother used to tell. She'd called it by another name, Wendigo. A creature born from cannibalism and desperation, always hungry, never satisfied. "Fire," I said suddenly. My grandmother always said they were afraid of fire. I dug through my pack and found our emergency flares. We had 6 of them, which might buy us enough time to find a way out. I cracked one open, and red light filled the chamber. The creature didn't like that. From somewhere in the darkness came an angry howling sound, like a wild cat crossed with a human scream. But it didn't come any closer. "It's working," Billy said. That's when Patricia's voice came from the darkness. Caleb? Billy? Is that you? Relief flooded through me. Patricia, where are you? I'm hurt, her voice called back. I fell into one of the passages. Can you help me? Billy started to move toward the voice, but I grabbed his arm. Wait. Something was wrong. Patricia's voice was coming from a tunnel that led down, deeper into the cave. But she'd been on the surface when we'd lost radio contact. How could she be below us? Please, Patricia's voice called again. I think my leg is broken. I need help. Patricia, I called back. What's the name of my dog? Silence. Then, I don't remember. Please, I'm really hurt. I'd never owned a dog. In 22 years of working together, Patricia would know that. It's mimicking her voice, I whispered to Billy. It can copy human speech. The thing that sounded like Patricia let out a frustrated growl, and then we heard something that made our blood freeze. It was laughing, but the laughter was coming from multiple directions at once. The creature wasn't alone down here. No, that wasn't right. It was the echoes. The cave system was so complex that sounds bounced around for minutes before fading away. But this thing was smart enough to use that to its advantage, making itself sound like a whole pack of monsters. I cracked a second flare and threw it into the tunnel where Patricia's voice had come from. In the red light, I saw something scurry away from the flame, something that moved like a spider but was far too large to be any normal creature. We need to get back to the surface, I told Billy. Now. But every passage we tried led deeper into the mountain. The creature was hurting us, driving us toward something. Finally, we found ourselves in the largest chamber yet, a vast space that our flares couldn't fully illuminate. And there, scattered around the floor, were the remains of the other missing students. They'd been arranged in a circle, like some kind of ritual. But they weren't just dead, they'd been changed. Stretched and twisted into impossible shapes, their bones extended and their skin pulled tight over enlarged skeletons. It was like something had been trying to make them into copies of itself. In the center of the circle was something that might have once been human. It was enormous, at least 12 feet tall, with limbs that were too long and joints that bent the wrong way. Its skin was pale and stretched, and its face was an awful mixture of human and something else. When it saw us, it spoke, not mimicking someone else's voice this time, but using its own. The words came out wrong, like it had forgotten how human mouths were supposed to work. Hungry, it said. So hungry, been waiting so long. I realized what we were looking at. This thing had once been human, one of the settlers from 1847 maybe, who'd survived the winter by eating his companions. But something had happened to him down here in the dark. He'd become something else, something that needed to feed on human flesh to survive. You're the last, it continued, its voice getting stronger. Been so long since fresh meat came to the mountain. You'll make me strong again. It started moving toward us, and I could see that it wasn't just fast, it was smart. It was positioning itself to cut off our escape routes, driving us back toward the bone circle. I had 3 flares left, not enough to keep it away for long. That's when I remembered the emergency explosives in my pack. Small charges we used for avalanche control, enough to bring down a rock face, or to collapse a cave tunnel. Billy, I whispered, when I give the signal, run for that passage on the left. Don't stop, no matter what you hear. I pulled out the explosives and started setting charges on the support pillars around the chamber. The creature saw what I was doing and let out a shriek of rage. It charged toward me, moving faster than anything that size should be able to move. I lit the fuse and ran. The explosion was deafening in the enclosed space. Rocks fell from the ceiling like rain, and the entire mountain seemed to shake. Behind us, the creature's screams were cut off as tons of limestone came crashing down. Billy and I stumbled through the darkness, following passages that led up, always up. We could hear more rumbling behind us as the cave system collapsed. After what felt like hours, we saw light ahead. Real light, daylight. We crawled out of the cave entrance just as the sun was setting. Patricia was there, alive and unhurt, along with a full search and rescue team. She'd never been in the caves at all. She'd been waiting on the surface, trying to reestablish radio contact. Caleb, Billy, she called out, running toward us. What happened down there? We heard the explosion. I looked back at the cave entrance. It was completely blocked now. tons of rock sealing whatever was left down there. But I could swear I saw something moving in the shadows between the stones. "Cave in," I told her. The tunnels weren't stable. It was the official story we went with. The missing students had died in a cave collapse caused by the unusual weather conditions. No mention of bite marks or claw scratches or things that hung bodies from cave ceilings. But I knew better. And sometimes, late at night, I could still hear that voice calling from deep underground. Hungry. So hungry. That was 40 years ago, and I've never been underground since. Can't do it. The moment I step into any enclosed space smaller than a barn, my heart starts racing and my hands start shaking. The department had to reassign me to surface searches only. They gave me a commendation for the rescue attempt. Said I'd shown exceptional bravery in adverse conditions. The families of the dead students sent thank you cards, grateful that we'd at least brought their children home for burial. But I know the truth. We didn't rescue anyone. We just survived something that should have killed us all. Billy left the service 6 months later. Last I heard, he was living in Florida, about as far from mountains as you can get. We don't talk about what happened, don't need to, we both know. Patricia stayed on for another 10 years. But she noticed things after Devil's Knob. How the local Cherokee elders would cross themselves when they heard certain names. How some caves in the national forest had warning signs that didn't quite make sense. How search and rescue teams would sometimes find bodies arranged in ways that couldn't be explained by natural causes. I started spending time with those elders, learning the old stories. Turns out my grandmother had told me more truth than I'd realized. The Wendigo wasn't just a legend. It was a warning, a way of remembering what could happen when people were pushed too far by hunger and desperation. The Cherokee had rituals for keeping such things contained, sacred sites that were never to be disturbed, ceremonies that had to be performed at certain times of the year. But most of the knowledge had been lost when the government forced the tribes to move west in the 1830 seconds. Your people sealed something that should have stayed sealed, old Joseph Darkwater told me. He was Ezekiel's nephew, one of the few who still remembered the old ways. But seals don't last forever. I asked him what he meant. "The mountain's been shaking," he said. "Small tremors, nothing the scientists would notice, but the spirits are restless. What you trapped down there is looking for another way out." That was 15 years ago. Since then, there have been other incidents. Hikers who disappear near cave systems throughout the Appalachians. Bodies found drained of blood or partially consumed. Always in winter, always near places where people once starved. The authorities blame bears or mountain lions. Natural causes. But I know better. Last month, a team of geologists doing seismic surveys reported strange readings under Devil's Knob. They said it looked like there were open spaces down there that shouldn't exist according to their charts. Caverns that seemed to extend for miles underground. One of them mentioned hearing sounds coming from deep in the mountain. Sounds that almost sounded like calling. I've been thinking about going back. Not into the caves. I couldn't do that if I wanted to. But maybe talking to the families who live near the mountain. Warning them about hiking alone in winter. Making sure people remember why some places are dangerous. Because here's what I learned that night in the caves. Some hungers never die, they just wait. And sometimes, when the conditions are right, when people are desperate enough or foolish enough to venture into places they shouldn't go, those old hungers wake up again. The Cherokee elders say the Wendigo grows stronger every time it feeds. That it can influence people, make them do things they wouldn't normally do. Make them curious about dark places. Make them want to explore. If you're ever hiking in the Appalachians in winter, and you see a cave entrance that seems a little too dark, a little too quiet, where the temperature drops for no reason, and your compass starts spinning, turn around and walk away. Don't think about the voices you might hear calling from the darkness. Don't wonder what might be down there in the deep places where the sun never reaches. Some hungers are older than civilization, and they're always waiting for the next meal to wander into their domain. The rocks we used to seal Devil's Knob are still there, far as I know. But rocks shift, mountains change, and 40 years is a long time for something to be planning its next move. Every winter, when the temperature drops and the snow starts falling heavy in the mountains, I find myself listening to the weather reports a little too carefully, waiting for news of missing hikers near Devil's Knob. So far, the mountain has been quiet. But I know it won't stay that way forever. My name is Isaiah Blackthorne, and I used to think I knew everything about animals. After 16 years, as a park ranger and a PhD in animal behavior, I'd seen just about every creature in the Appalachian Mountains. Bears, wolves, mountain lions, TNT. I could track them, study them, and predict what they'd do next. I was the guy other rangers called when they found weird tracks or heard strange sounds in the woods. I worked in the George Washington National Forest in Virginia, in a place called Shadow Valley. It got that name because the mountains around it were so tall that sunlight only hit the valley floor for a few hours each day. The place was old, really old. During the Civil War, soldiers had fought and died there. Some folks said you could still find old buttons and bullets if you knew where to look. Shadow Valley was special to me because it was one of the last wild places left. No roads went into it. If you wanted to get there, you had to walk for miles through thick oak forests. The trees were huge, some of them hundreds of years old. Native Americans had lived there long before the war, and you could still see the burial mounds they'd built. I'd been studying the wildlife there for years. The valley had everything: deer, black bears, wild turkeys, and even some rare species that weren't found anywhere else. I'd written over 200 research papers about the animals I'd studied. Other scientists knew my work. I was good at my job. But the thing I was most proud of was debunking fake monster stories. Every year, people would come to me with blurry photos or wild tales about creatures that didn't exist. Bigfoot, werewolves, giant snakes, I'd heard them all. And every single time, I could prove what they'd really seen. A bear walking on its back legs looks like a monster from far away. A large dog's tracks in mud can look like something much scarier. I used science to show people the truth. That's why what happened in September 1976 was so hard for me to accept. It was an unusually cold autumn that year. The leaves changed color early, and there was frost on the ground most mornings. I remember thinking how quiet the woods seemed. Too quiet. It started with the dogs. A local hunter named Bill Matthews had been training his hounds near the valley when something killed them. Not just killed them, destroyed them. When Bill found them, they were arranged in a circle, their bodies torn apart in ways that made no sense. No bear or mountain lion kills like that. And the strange thing was, the dogs' leashes were untied, not broken. Something had taken the time to untie them. Bill was shaking when he told me about it. He'd been hunting those woods for 30 years and had never seen anything like it. It wasn't natural, Isaiah, he kept saying. Whatever did this knew what it was doing. I told him what I always told people, that we'd figure it out with science. There was always a logical explanation. But when I got to the site and saw those dogs myself, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Fear. Real, cold fear that started in my stomach and spread through my whole body. The dogs weren't just dead. They were positioned like they were part of some kind of ritual. And the smell? It wasn't the normal smell of death. It was something else, something that made my nose burn and my eyes water. I'd studied predator kills for years, but this was different. This was wrong. I took pictures, made notes, and collected samples, just like I always did. But as I worked, I kept feeling like something was watching me from the tree line. Every time I looked up, I saw nothing but shadows between the oak trees. Still, the feeling wouldn't go away. That night, back at my cabin, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those dogs and the way they'd been arranged. I'd seen bears kill dogs before, and mountain lions too. They kill to eat or to protect themselves. They don't arrange bodies in circles. They don't untie leashes. I was missing something important, and I knew it. But my scientific training told me to stick to the facts. There had to be a normal explanation. There always was. I just didn't know yet how wrong I was going to be. The next morning, I went back to Shadow Valley with my graduate student, Rebecca Thornwood. Rebecca was smart, probably smarter than me. She was working on her master's degree in wildlife biology and had come to help me with research for the summer. She'd stayed on into fall because she loved the work as much as I did. "Dr. Blackthorne," she said as we hiked into the valley, "I've been thinking about those dog kills. The pattern doesn't match any known predator behavior." "I know," I said. "That's why we're going to set up cameras and see what we're really dealing with." I brought all my best equipment: motion-activated cameras, audio recorders, and devices to test the soil and air. If something was living in these woods, I was going to find it and identify it. We set up our first camera near where the dogs had been killed. As I worked, I noticed something strange. The forest was completely silent. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering, no insects buzzing. In 16 years of working in these woods, I'd never heard them this quiet. "Rebecca," I said, "when was the last time you heard a bird?" She stopped what she was doing and listened. After a few seconds, her face went pale. I can't remember, not since we got here." We kept working, but the silence was getting to both of us. It felt like the whole forest was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. That's when we found the tracks. They were near a small stream about 100 yards from where the dogs had died. At first, they looked like dog tracks, big ones, maybe from a German Shepherd or similar breed. But as I studied them closer, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The front paws had what looked like thumbs. "Rebecca, come look at this," I called. She knelt down beside me and examined the prints. Those can't be right." I measured them carefully. They were 18 inches apart, which meant whatever made them had a stride much longer than any normal dog. And some of the tracks showed only 2 feet, like something had been walking upright. Could they be bear tracks? Rebecca asked, but her voice showed she didn't believe it. "Bears don't walk in straight lines like this," I said. "And their front paws don't look anything like this." I made plaster casts of the best prints and took dozens of photos. As we worked, I kept getting that feeling again, like something was watching us. The back of my neck prickled, and I found myself looking over my shoulder every few minutes. We followed the tracks for almost a mile. They led deeper into the valley, toward an area where the trees grew so thick that barely any light reached the ground. The tracks seemed to disappear at the base of a huge old oak tree. "Dr. Blackthorn?" Rebecca whispered, pointing up at the tree trunk. About 8 feet up, there were deep scratches in the bark. They looked like claw marks, but they were too high and too perfectly spaced to be from any animal I knew. And there were dozens of similar marks on trees all around us. "Territory markers," I said, more to myself than to Rebecca. "Territory markers for what?" I didn't have an answer. We headed back to set up more cameras, but when we got to where we'd left our equipment, we found it destroyed. Not damaged by weather or knocked over by animals, we headed by feuder, destroyed. The cameras had been deliberately smashed, and the pieces were scattered around like someone had thrown them in anger. Rebecca picked up a piece of one of the cameras. "Dr. Blackthorn, look at this." The metal casing had tooth marks in it, but they weren't from any animal I'd ever seen. They were too big, too deep, and they were in groups of 4 on each side, like something with human-like teeth had bitten down on the metal. That's when we heard the howling. It started far away, just one voice, but then others joined in, until there were at least 6 or 7 different howls echoing through the valley. They sounded like wolves, but wrong somehow. Too deep, too controlled. And underneath the howling, I could swear I heard something else. Something that sounded almost like human voices. Rebecca grabbed my arm. "We need to leave, now." I wanted to argue, to tell her we needed to stay and document what we were hearing. But the howling was getting closer, and every instinct I had was screaming at me to run. We packed up what was left of our equipment and hiked out of the valley as fast as we could. The howling followed us for almost 2 miles, always staying just far enough away that we couldn't see what was making the sound. That night, I called my supervisor and requested backup. I told him we had a pack of aggressive wild dogs that were behaving unusually. I didn't mention the tracks with thumbs or the deliberate destruction of our equipment. I wasn't ready to admit what I was starting to suspect, but as I tried to sleep that night, I kept hearing those howls in my head. And the more I thought about it, the more convinced I became that some of those sounds had definitely been human voices, mixed in with the animal ones. Whatever was living in Shadow Valley, it wasn't just an animal. And it was smart enough to know we were studying it. 2 days later, everything changed. A local hunter named Nathaniel Grayson went missing in Shadow Valley. His wife called the ranger station when he didn't come home, and I led the search team that went looking for him. We found him 3 miles into the valley, and I wish we hadn't. Nathaniel was an experienced hunter who'd been tracking deer in those woods for over 20 years. He carried a high-powered rifle and knew how to use it, but when we found him, his rifle was still in his hands, unfired. Whatever had killed him had been too fast for him to even pull the trigger. I won't describe what the body looked like. Some things are better left unsaid. But I will say that no bear or mountain lion could have done what we saw. The wounds were too precise, too purposeful. And like with the dogs, there was that same strange smell that made my eyes water. Rebecca found tracks around the body. Lots of them. The same impossible tracks we'd seen before. But this time there were more details. We could see where multiple creatures had circled Nathaniel, working together like a pack of wolves. But wolves didn't have thumbs. Wolves didn't walk upright for part of their hunt. "Dr. Blackthorne," Rebecca said quietly, "we need to call this in to the state police. This isn't a wildlife issue anymore." I knew she was right, but I also knew what would happen. The police would close the valley to researchers, and I'd never get a chance to figure out what was really happening. My scientific curiosity was stronger than my common sense. "Let's gather more evidence first," I said. "We need to understand what we're dealing with." That decision probably cost Rebecca her life. We set up a new base camp at the edge of the valley, with better equipment and multiple escape routes planned. I brought in my colleague, Dr. Mills, a historian who knew about the Civil War battles that had happened in the area. I also asked Daniel Ironside, one of our best park volunteers, to help with logistics. Dr. Mills told us things about Shadow Valley that I'd never heard before. During the war, an entire Confederate unit had been trapped in the valley during a winter storm. Union forces had surrounded them, and rather than surrender, the Confederate soldiers had fought to the last man. Over 200 soldiers had died in that valley, many of them buried in mass graves that were never properly marked. The local Native Americans warned settlers to stay away from this place long before the Civil War, Dr. Mills explained. They said the land was cursed, that the spirits of warriors were trapped here. I'd always dismissed that kind of talk as superstition. But after what I'd seen, I was starting to wonder if the old stories might have some truth to them. On our third night in the valley, Rebecca volunteered to check the camera traps we'd set up near the burial grounds. I should have gone with her, but I was analyzing soil samples and told her I'd catch up in a few minutes. I never saw her alive again. Her scream cut through the night air like a knife. It was high and terrified, and it cut off suddenly in a way that made my blood freeze. Daniel and I grabbed flashlights and ran toward the sound, but we were too late. We found Rebecca's backpack first, then her camera, and finally her body. The camera was still recording. When I watched the footage later, I saw something that changed everything I believed about the world. The camera showed Rebecca approaching one of our motion sensors when the bushes around her began to move. But it wasn't wind moving them, it was something pushing through them deliberately. Then shapes started emerging from the darkness. Tall shapes that moved sometimes on 4 legs, sometimes on 2. The camera caught clear images for about 10 seconds before Rebecca dropped it. In those 10 seconds, I saw creatures that shouldn't exist. They looked like a cross between wolves and humans, POT, about 7 feet tall when standing upright, covered in dark fur, with faces that were too intelligent, too aware. Their eyes reflected the camera's light like animal eyes, but there was something human in them too. They moved with purpose, like soldiers following a battle plan. They surrounded Rebecca before she even knew they were there. And in the last clear frame, I saw one of them stand up on its back legs and reach for her with hands that had claws instead of fingers. When Daniel and I found her body, those things were gone. But I could feel them watching us from the darkness as we carried Rebecca out of the valley. Every shadow seemed to move. Every sound made us jump. Dr. Mills examined the footage with me back at base camp. His face went white as he watched. "My God," he whispered. "The old stories were true. They're real." "What's real?" I asked, even though I was starting to understand. "The cursed soldiers." The Native Americans said that warriors who died without honor would be transformed, forced to guard the battlefield forever. I thought it was just folklore, but... He pointed at the screen, where one of the creatures was clearly visible. "Look at how they move together. That's military discipline. They're hunting like soldiers, not like animals." That night, none of us slept. We could hear them howling in the distance, and sometimes we thought we could see eyes watching us from just beyond the range of our lights. Daniel wanted to leave immediately. "We're in over our heads," he said. "We need the National Guard or something." But I couldn't leave, not yet. Rebecca had died trying to understand these things, and I owed it to her to finish what we'd started. I needed to know the truth, even if it killed me. Looking back, I realized that's exactly what they wanted. The attack came at dawn on our 4th day. I was awake, studying the camera footage for the 100th time, when Daniel shook me hard. "Dr. Blackthorne, we have a problem. A big one." I looked where he was pointing and felt my heart stop. There were tracks everywhere around our camp, dozens of them, forming a perfect circle about 50 feet from our tents. The creatures had surrounded us while we slept, but they hadn't attacked. They just watched. "Doctor." Mills was examining the tracks with a magnifying glass. "These are fresh," he said, "made within the last hour." "How many of them are there?" I asked. "At least 7, maybe more. And look at this." He pointed to a set of tracks that led right up to our supply tent. They went through our equipment. Sure enough, our food supplies had been carefully sorted through. Nothing was taken, but everything had been moved and examined. It was like they were studying us the same way we were studying them. They're testing us, I realized, seeing what we'll do. That's when we found the message. Someone, or something, had arranged rocks near our camp in a clear pattern. It wasn't random. The stones formed an arrow pointing deeper into the valley, toward the old burial grounds. "They want us to follow them," Daniel said. "Absolutely not," Dr. Mills said immediately. "It's obviously a trap." But I was already packing my gear. If it's a trap, then at least we'll finally see what we're dealing with. We can't keep running from this. Dr. Mills refused to come with us, but Daniel insisted on accompanying me. "You're not going alone," he said. "Rebecca died alone. That's not happening again." I should have ordered him to stay at camp. I should have called for backup or evacuation. But I was obsessed with understanding these creatures, and that obsession clouded my judgment. We followed the stone arrow deeper into Shadow Valley than I'd ever gone before. The trees grew thicker and taller, blocking out most of the sunlight. Ancient burial mounds rose from the forest floor like small hills, covered in moss and fallen leaves. The tracks led us to the largest mound, where we found something that made my scientific worldview crumble completely. There was a clearing around the burial mound, and in that clearing were the remains of a camp, but not a modern camp. This one had been there for over 100 years. I could see the remnants of Civil War-era equipment. Rusted muskets, brass buttons, pieces of gray uniform fabric that had somehow survived the weather. And standing around the camp were 7 of them. They didn't hide or run when they saw us. They just stood there, watching, like they'd been waiting for us to arrive. In daylight, they were even more terrifying than they'd appeared in Rebecca's camera footage. They stood like humans, but were built like wolves. Their faces were a nightmare combination of both. Elongated snouts filled with teeth, but with human-like intelligence burning in their yellow eyes. Their hands ended in claws, but they held themselves like soldiers, with military posture and discipline. The largest one, obviously the pack leader, stepped forward. When it spoke, I nearly fainted. "You have been studying us," it said in a voice that was part growl, part human speech. "Why?" Daniel grabbed my arm so hard I could feel his fingernails digging into my skin. "It can talk," he whispered. "We are researchers," I managed to say, surprised that my voice worked at all. "We want to understand." The creature tilted its head, considering this. "We were soldiers once. Now we guard this place. You do not belong here." "The Civil War ended over 100 years ago," I said. "For you, perhaps. Not for us. We died here. We remain here. We protect here." Another of the creatures stepped forward and sniffed the air in our direction. "This one carries the scent of the female we killed. He seeks revenge." "No," I said quickly. "I seek understanding. She was my student. I want to know why she died." The pack leader's lips pulled back, showing teeth like daggers. "She sought to capture us, to study us like animals. We are not animals. We are soldiers." "But what are you?" I asked. "How is this possible?" The leader gestured toward the burial mound behind him. "We fought. We died. We were buried without honor in mass graves. The old magic of this place would not let us rest. We became what we needed to become to guard our fallen brothers. I was starting to understand. These weren't just random monsters. They were the cursed spirits of Confederate soldiers, transformed into something between human and wolf, bound to protect the battlefield where they'd died. "We don't want to disturb your rest," I said. "We'll leave and never come back." The pack leader shook his massive head. "Too late. You have seen us. You have evidence. Others will come." That's when I realized we weren't going to be allowed to leave. The pack began to spread out, surrounding us just like they'd surrounded Rebecca. But this time, I was ready. I'd been studying the old burial grounds, and I remembered something Dr. Mills had told me about Native American burial customs. "Wait!" I shouted, pulling a small bag from my backpack. "I have an offering for the honored dead." The creatures stopped moving. The pack leader's ears pricked forward with interest. I emptied the bag onto the ground. It contained tobacco, sage, and sweetgrass, traditional offerings that I'd brought to show respect to the Native American burial sites. "I honor your sacrifice," I said, not really knowing if I was doing this right. "I honor your service. I ask for safe passage for my companion and myself." The pack leader approached the offerings and sniffed them carefully. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then, slowly, he nodded. "You show respect for the dead. This is good. You may leave. But if you return, if you bring others, we will not be so merciful." Daniel and I backed away slowly, never taking our eyes off the pack. It wasn't until we were almost a mile away that we dared to run. We found Dr. Mills dead when we got back to camp. The tent was shredded, and there was blood everywhere. But no body, just his glasses and one of his boots. As we gathered what we could and fled Shadow Valley, I heard the pack howling behind us. But this time, the howls sounded different. They sounded like a funeral song. That was 49 years ago, and I still wake up some nights hearing those howls. The official report blamed all 3 deaths on a pack of aggressive feral dogs that were later eliminated by park services. Of course, no dogs were ever found, and the investigation was closed quickly. My research project was shut down, my funding pulled, and I was quietly transferred to a desk job in Richmond. I never worked in the field again. Every time I tried to go into a forest, I'd start shaking and sweating. The smell of pine trees made me sick. The sound of wind in the leaves made me think I was hearing howls. I retired early and spent the next 30 years researching folklore and Native American history. I wanted to understand what I'd experienced, to find other accounts of similar phenomena. I found more than I'd expected. There are stories like mine from battlefields all across America. Gettysburg, Antietam, Shiloh, Ark, places where soldiers died in great numbers and were buried hastily in mass graves. Park rangers and historians who work at these sites will tell you, if you ask them privately and they trust you, about things they've seen that don't make it into official reports. Strange sounds in the night, figures in old uniforms walking among the monuments, animals that behave in ways that don't make sense. Most of them dismiss it as imagination or stress. But some of them, the ones who've been there longest, they know better. I became a battlefield guide after I retired, specializing in sites where unexplained phenomena had been reported. I couldn't go back to Shadow Valley. It's been closed to the public since 1976. But I could help other people understand the importance of respecting the places where soldiers died. I tell visitors to Civil War battlefields something I learned the hard way. These places are sacred ground. The men who died here deserve our respect and remembrance. If you visit these sites, bring offerings. Say a prayer. Thank them for their sacrifice. Don't treat these places like tourist attractions or hunting grounds. Because some of those soldiers never left. And they're still on duty. I'm 82 years old now, and I won't be around much longer. That's why I'm finally telling this story. People need to know that there are things in this world that science can't explain, and some places where the dead don't rest easy. Shadow Valley is still closed to the public. Officially, it's because of environmental concerns and difficult terrain. But I know the real reason. Every few years, someone tries to sneak in. Urban explorers, paranormal investigators, kids on dares. Most of them come back out scared and never return. But some of them don't come back at all. Last month, I got a call from a young park ranger who works the George Washington National Forest. She'd found some old research files with my name on them and wanted to ask me about Shadow Valley. She'd been hearing stories from local hunters about strange sounds in the woods about animals behaving strangely. I told her what I'm telling you now. Leave it alone. Some mysteries are meant to stay unsolved. Some places are meant to be left undisturbed. But I know she won't listen. Scientists never do. The need to understand, to explain, to prove, it's stronger than common sense or self-preservation. I know because I was the same way once. If you're reading this and you're thinking about investigating Shadow Valley or any other place like it, remember Rebecca Thornwood. Remember Daniel Ironside. Remember Dr. Mills. And remember that some guards never abandon their posts, no matter how long ago their war ended. The pack is still out there, still protecting the bones of their fallen comrades. And they'll be there long after we're all gone, howling their eternal vigil into the Appalachian night. My name is Isaiah Blackthorne, and this is my warning to you. Some truths are too dangerous to seek. My name is Jeremiah Stonecrow, and I've been a ranger in the Daniel Boone National Forest for 24 years. I know these Kentucky mountains like the back of my hands. My family has lived in these parts for 6 generations, and we know every trail, every creek, and every hollow. Hell Hollow got its name long before I started working here. The old-timers say it's because the place feels wrong somehow. Too quiet, too dark, even on sunny days. My great-grandfather told stories about moonshiners who used to hide their stills down there back in the 1920 seconds. Some of them never came back out. I never believed those stories. I'm a practical man. I fix trails, build emergency shelters, and help lost hikers find their way home. When people told me about giant footprints they'd seen in Hell Hollow, I'd just nod and explain how a bear's paw can look mighty big when it sinks deep into soft mud. The hollow sits way back in the forest, tucked between 2 limestone cliffs that rise up like walls on both sides. There's only one safe way down into it, a narrow trail that winds along the cliff face. Most folks don't even know it exists. The ones who do usually have enough sense to stay away. I should have listened to them. It was August 1971, and we were having the worst heat wave anyone could remember. The springs that usually fed the creek at the bottom of Hell Hollow had dried up to just a trickle. Even the animals seemed to be avoiding the place. I'd been doing my regular patrol route when I got the radio call that changed everything. "Jeremiah, we got a problem," came the voice of my supervisor, Bill Watson. "We got 4 scientists from the university who went into Hell Hollow 3 days ago to do some kind of rock study. They were supposed to radio in yesterday, but we haven't heard a word. 4 people. Scientists who should have known better than to go down there without telling someone their exact plans. But Hell Hollow wasn't supposed to be dangerous, just remote and hard to reach. I'll head down there and take a look," I told Bill. "Probably just radio trouble." I packed my gear and started the 2-hour hike to Hell Hollow. The closer I got, the more wrong everything felt. The birds had gone quiet. Not even the usual buzz of insects, just my boots crunching on the dry leaves and the sound of my own breathing. When I reached the edge of the cliff and looked down into the hollow, I saw their camp right away. 4 bright orange tents set up in a neat line next to what was left of the creek. But something was off. The tents were still there, but they looked empty. Flat, like nobody had slept in them. I made my way down the trail, taking my time on the loose rocks. The heat was thick and heavy, even in the shade of the cliffs. By the time I reached the bottom, sweat was running down my back like a river. The camp was a mess. Not torn up like you'd expect from bears or wild pigs, just scattered. A sleeping bag hung from a tree branch 15 feet up. Cooking pots were scattered across the rocks like someone had thrown them. And their expensive equipment, the kind of stuff scientists use to study rocks, was spread out over an area the size of a football field. I found one of their notebooks lying open next to the dead creek. The last entry was from 3 days ago. "Strange formations in the limestone. Need to investigate the caves tomorrow." Caves. I'd been patrolling this area for over 20 years, and I'd never seen any caves. That's when I noticed the smell. Not the usual forest smells of dirt and rotting leaves. This was something else. Something that made my stomach turn and my skin crawl. Like meat left out in the sun too long. I followed the smell deeper into the hollow, and that's when I saw the first footprint. It was pressed deep into the mud next to the creek, clear as day. But it wasn't from any boot I'd ever seen. Too big, too wide. And the toes. The toes looked almost human, but stretched out like they belonged to something much, much larger. I knelt down next to it and put my hand over the print for size. My hand barely covered 3 of the toes. I'd seen plenty of bear tracks in my time. Black bears were common in these mountains, and their back paws could look almost human when they walked on 2 legs. But this was different. The print was too deep, too clear, and way too big. Whatever made it had to weigh at least 400 or 500 pounds. I followed the tracks away from the creek and up toward the far cliff. They were easy to spot in the soft earth, a line of giant prints heading straight toward a crack in the rock face I'd never noticed before. The crack was just wide enough for a person to squeeze through sideways. That had to be where the scientists went. I radioed back to headquarters. "Bill, I found their camp. Looks like they went exploring and found some kind of cave system. I'm going to follow their trail and see what happened. Be careful down there, Jeremiah. And keep your radio on." I squeezed through the crack in the rock and found myself in a narrow passage that opened up into a big underground room. The scientists had been here all right. I could see where they'd set up their lights and equipment. But they were gone now, and their stuff was scattered around just like at the camp outside. The room had 3 tunnels leading deeper into the cliff. I picked the middle one and started walking, using my flashlight to follow what looked like boot prints in the soft cave dirt. The tunnel sloped downward and got wider as I went. The air was cool and damp, a relief after the heat outside. I walked for maybe 10 minutes before I found the first body. Dr. Sarah Chen was lying face down in a side chamber, her arms spread out like she'd been running and just collapsed. When I rolled her over, I could see she'd been dead for at least a day. But there wasn't a mark on her. No blood. No sign of what killed her. She just looked scared, like she'd died of pure terror. I checked for a pulse anyway, but her skin was cold as stone. Whatever happened to her had happened fast. I radioed back to report what I'd found, but all I got was static. The rock walls were too thick. I was on my own until I could get back outside. I kept following the tunnel, and that's when I heard it. Footsteps. Heavy, slow footsteps echoing from somewhere up ahead. Too heavy to be human. Each step made a sound like someone dropping a big rock on the cave floor. I turned off my flashlight and listened. The footsteps stopped. In the complete darkness of the cave, I could hear my heart beating like a drum. I waited for what felt like an hour, but was probably only a few minutes. Then I heard something that made my blood freeze. Breathing. Deep, slow breathing coming from somewhere in the darkness ahead of me. Not human breathing. Something bigger. Something that sounded like it was tasting the air. I turned my flashlight back on and pointed it down the tunnel. Nothing there. Just empty space and rock walls. But I could still hear that breathing, and now I could smell something too. The same rotten smell from outside, but stronger. Much stronger. I started backing toward the way I came, keeping my light pointed ahead. That's when I saw the second body. Dr. Marcus Webb was stuck in a crack in the ceiling about 12 feet up. Not wedged in like he'd fallen. Stuck there like someone had shoved him up into the rock with tremendous force. His eyes were wide open, staring down at me. I'd seen enough. Whatever happened to these people was beyond anything I could handle alone. I needed to get out of there and call for backup. Real backup. Maybe even the state police. I turned and ran back through the tunnels as fast as I could without tripping in the dark. Behind me, I heard those footsteps again. Faster now, coming after me. I made it to the crack in the rock just as something huge moved in the darkness behind me. I squeezed through and stumbled out into the hollow, gasping in the hot air like it was the sweetest thing I'd ever tasted. But when I looked back at the crack in the rock, I saw something that made me forget all about the heat. A hand, a massive hand with fingers as thick as tree branches, was reaching out of the crack, feeling around the edges like it was trying to figure out how to get through. The fingers were covered in dark hair, and the nails looked more like claws. I ran. I ran like I'd never run before, scrambling up that cliff trail without looking back once. I didn't stop until I reached the top and my radio started working again. Bill, are you there? Jeremiah, what's your status? We got 2 dead scientists down there, and we got a big problem. I need backup. Lots of backup. And whatever you do, don't send anyone down there alone. They sent Tom Whitefield down from the main office, along with a team of state police officers and a couple of paramedics. Tom was a good man, 15 years of ranger service and steady as a rock. If anyone could help me figure out what happened in Hell Hollow, it was him. We set up a base camp at the top of the cliff and went down together the next morning. I told Tom everything I'd seen, but I could tell he thought I was letting the heat and the stress get to me. He didn't say it, but I could see it in his eyes when I described the hand reaching out of the cave. "Let's just focus on finding the other 2 scientists," he said. "Then we can worry about what killed them." The first thing we noticed was that the camp below had been torn apart even more. The tents were shredded, like someone had taken a knife to them. The scientists' car, a jeep they'd parked at the bottom of the trail, was flipped upside down. It took 4 men and a winch to flip a jeep like that. "Could have been a bear," said Officer Martinez, one of the state cops. "Big male black bear could do this if it was mad enough." But when we found the tracks around the jeep, Martinez went quiet. They were the same prints I'd seen before, only deeper. Whatever made them had been angry. The crack in the rock was bigger now. What had been just wide enough for a person to squeeze through was now big enough for someone to walk through standing up. The edges looked like they'd been clawed at by something with tremendous strength. "I don't like this," Tom muttered as we got our lights ready. "The whole thing feels wrong." We went into the caves in a group, me, Tom, Martinez, and another officer named Brown. We found Dr. Chen's body right where I'd left it, and Dr. Webb was still stuck in the ceiling crack. But there was no sign of the other 2 scientists. We followed the main tunnel deeper into the cliff than I'd gone before. The tunnel opened up into a huge underground room with a ceiling so high our lights couldn't reach it. And that's where we found what was left of Dr. Kevin Park. He was hanging from the ceiling by his ankle, about 30 feet up, hanging from a rope made of twisted tree roots. Below him, scratched into the cave floor, were symbols I'd never seen before, circles and lines that looked almost like writing. "How did he get up there?" Brown asked, his voice echoing in the big room. "More important," Tom said. "How do we get him down?" That's when we heard the growl. It came from one of the side tunnels. Why, a low, rumbling sound like a landslide starting up, but it went on too long to be rocks falling. It rose and fell like something breathing, but deeper than any animal I'd ever heard. "Everyone stay together," Martinez said, pulling out his pistol. "Whatever's in here, we face it as a group." The growl came again, closer this time. And then we heard footsteps. The same heavy footsteps I'd heard before, but now there were more of them. Like whatever was down here wasn't alone. Our lights started flickering, all of them at the same time. In the stuttering light, I saw something move at the edge of the big room. Something tall and covered in dark hair, standing just outside the reach of our beams. "There!" Brown shouted, pointing his light toward the movement. But when our lights hit the spot, nothing was there. "We need to leave," I said. "Right now." "We can't leave Dr. Park," Tom argued. "Doctor Park is dead. We need to worry about staying alive." That's when the rocks started falling. Not little pebbles from the ceiling. Big rocks. Boulder-sized chunks of limestone crashing down around us like someone was throwing them. One of them missed Martinez by inches and cracked the cave floor when it hit. "Move! Move!" Martinez yelled. We ran for the tunnel that led back outside, but more rocks blocked our way. We were trapped in the big room with whatever was hunting us. That's when I saw it clearly for the first time. It stood at least 12 feet tall, covered in dark brown hair that looked almost black in our lights. Its shoulders were broader than a doorway, and its arms hung down almost to its knees. But the worst part was its face. It looked almost human, but wrong, like someone had stretched a human face over a skull that was too big for it. And it was smart. I could see intelligence in those dark eyes. This wasn't just some animal acting on instinct. It was thinking, planning. It looked right at me and opened its mouth, showing teeth the size of my thumb. Then it let out a roar that shook dust from the ceiling and made my ears ring. Brown shot at it 3 times. I saw the bullets hit its chest, but it didn't even flinch. It just looked at Brown like he was an annoying bug, then reached down and picked up a rock the size of a washing machine. It threw the rock at Brown with perfect aim. Officer Brown was there 1 second, and the next second, he was just gone, crushed under tons of limestone. "Run!" Tom screamed. We scattered in different directions. Martinez went left toward one of the side tunnels. Tom went right. I dove behind a pile of fallen rocks and tried to make myself as small as possible. The creature followed Martinez. I heard him screaming for about 10 seconds, and then the screaming stopped. I waited behind those rocks for what felt like hours, listening to that thing moving around in the darkness. Sometimes I'd hear Tom's voice calling my name from somewhere in the tunnels, but I didn't answer. I was too scared that the thing would hear me too. When everything finally went quiet, I made my way back toward the entrance. But the tunnel had changed somehow. The walls were in different places, and there were new passages that hadn't been there before. It was like the whole cave system was shifting around me. I finally found my way out just as the sun was setting. Tom was already there, waiting at the top of the cliff with the rest of our team. His face was white as paper, and his hands were shaking. "Where are Martinez and Brown?" asked one of the other officers. Tom just shook his head. "We need to seal that cave," I told them. "Whatever's down there, we can't let it get out." But when we looked down into Hell Hollow the next morning, the crack in the rock was gone. The cliff face was smooth and solid, like there had never been a cave there at all. The officials wanted to call it an accident. Rock slide, they said. Tragic cave-in that killed 4 scientists and 2 police officers. They posted signs around Hell Hollow warning people to stay away due to geological instability. But I knew better. And so did Tom. We couldn't let it go. 3 days after they sealed off the area, Tom and I went back down there with our own equipment. We had to know what we were really dealing with. The crack in the rock was back, bigger than ever. And the smell coming out of it was so bad we had to wrap bandanas around our faces just to get close. "Maybe we should call in the military," Tom said. "This is way beyond what park rangers can handle." "And tell them what? That there's a 12-foot monster living in a cave that appears and disappears? They'll lock us up." Before Tom could answer, we heard voices coming from inside the cave. Human voices, calling for help. "That's impossible," Tom whispered. "Everyone who went in there is dead." But the voices were real. We could hear them clearly, a man and a woman, shouting that they were lost and needed help. "It's a trap," I said. "That thing is smart enough to imitate human voices." But Tom was already heading for the cave entrance. "We can't just leave them if there's a chance they're real people." I followed him in, cursing under my breath. The tunnel was different again, wider and straighter, like something had been digging it out. Our flashlights seemed dimmer than usual, barely pushing back the darkness. We followed the voices deeper into the cliff, but they always seemed to be coming from just ahead of us. Around the next corner, through the next passage, leading us deeper and deeper underground. That's when I realized the truth. We weren't following the voices to find survivors. The voices were following us to make sure we got lost. "Tom, we need to turn around right now. Just a little further." I think I heard Dr. Morgan calling my name. Doctor. Morgan had been one of the scientists. She'd been dead for a week. The tunnel opened up into the same big room where we'd lost Martinez and Brown. But now it was different. The walls were covered in bones, human bones arranged in patterns that hurt to look at. And in the center of the room stood 3 of them. 3 creatures, each one bigger than the one I'd seen before. The largest one had to be 15 feet tall, with arms that could have wrapped around a tree trunk. They were waiting for us. But they weren't just animals. As I watched, the smallest one picked up a human skull and began arranging it with the others on the wall. It was making art. Or maybe a warning. That's when I heard the old Cherokee words my great-grandmother had taught me when I was little. Words I hadn't thought about in 30 years. "They are the guardians," said a voice behind us. We spun around to find an old Cherokee man standing in the tunnel entrance. I'd never seen him before, but somehow I wasn't surprised he was there. "My name is Samuel Nighthawk," he said. "My people have known about them for hundreds of years. They guard the sacred places, the burial caves, where our ancestors rest." "Burial caves?" Tom asked. Samuel pointed to the walls covered in bones. "This is where the Cherokee brought their dead for 1,000 years, until the white men came and drove us away. But the guardians stayed. They always stay." The largest creature stepped forward and let out that bone-shaking roar. But Samuel just held up his hand and spoke to it in Cherokee. The creature stopped and tilted its head, listening. "He says you have disturbed the rest of the dead. The scientists came here with their machines and their noise, and they woke the ancestors. Now the guardians are angry." "How do we fix this?" I asked. You show respect, you bring offerings, you promise to keep others away from this place." Samuel reached into his bag and pulled out a pouch of tobacco and some eagle feathers. He placed them on the ground and spoke more Cherokee words. The creatures watched but didn't move. "This is sacred ground," Samuel told us. "It must be protected. The guardians will let you leave, but only if you promise to tell no one what you've seen here. And you must make sure no one else comes to disturb the ancestors." I looked at Tom. His face was pale, but he nodded. "We promise," I said. The largest creature stepped aside and gestured toward the tunnel with one massive arm. It was letting us go. We backed toward the entrance, never taking our eyes off them. Just as we reached the tunnel, the largest one spoke. Not in Cherokee, in English. "Remember your promise," it said in a voice like rocks grinding together. "We are always watching." That was 40 years ago, and I've kept my promise. Tom and I worked together to make sure Hell Hollow stayed off limits. We moved the trail markers, filed reports about dangerous rockfalls, and generally did everything we could to keep people away from that place. When Tom retired, he moved to Florida and never talked about what happened. But before he left, he made me promise to keep watching over the hollow. I did more than that. I sought out Samuel Nighthawk and learned everything I could about Cherokee traditions and sacred sites. I learned that there are other places like Hell Hollow scattered throughout the Appalachian Mountains, places where the old guardians still protect the remains of the ancestors. The Cherokee have a word for them, *kekle kudle*, which means the tall ones who walk in darkness. They were here long before humans arrived, but they made an agreement with the Cherokee people centuries ago. The guardians would protect the sacred sites, and the Cherokee would make sure they were left alone. When European settlers came and pushed the Cherokee out, the guardians stayed behind. Most of them went deep underground or high into the mountains where no one would find them. But a few remained in places like Hell Hollow, keeping their ancient promise to protect the dead. I'm retired now, but I still go back to Hell Hollow every few months. Not down into the valley, I'm not stupid. But I sit on the cliff and leave tobacco offerings the way Samuel taught me. Sometimes I see tracks in the mud below. Sometimes I hear voices calling from the cave. The state still keeps the area closed to the public. The official reason is geological instability. But the real reason is that I file a report every year documenting new rockfalls and dangerous conditions. As long as I'm alive, no one is going down there to disturb the ancestors again. But I won't live forever, and that worries me. What happens when there's no one left who knows the truth? What happens when some developer decides Hell Hollow would make a nice spot for a resort? What happens when someone decides those geological hazard signs are just government paranoia? I've been training my replacement, a young ranger named Katie Morrison. She's smart and respectful, and she listens when I tell her stories about the old days. I haven't told her the whole truth yet, but I will before I retire completely. She'll need to know what she's really protecting, because they're still down there, all of them, the guardians and the ancestors they protect. And they're still watching. Last week, a group of college kids went missing about 20 miles north of Hell Hollow. They were found 3 days later, alive but scared out of their minds. They claimed something huge had chased them through the forest all night, herding them away from an area where they'd planned to set up camp. When I checked the location on my maps, I saw it was marked as another Cherokee burial site. The guardians are still keeping their promise. The question is, are we keeping ours? If you ever find yourself hiking in the deep mountains of Kentucky, and you come across a place that feels wrong somehow, too quiet, too dark, with a smell you can't identify, I suggest you turn around and walk away. Some places are meant to be left alone. The Cherokee understood this. They knew that not all of nature's mysteries are meant to be solved. I learned that lesson the hard way in Hell Hollow, and I've been living with it ever since. Some nights I still wake up hearing that grinding voice saying, "We are always watching." And I know it's true, they're still down, there, in Hell Hollow and places like it throughout these ancient mountains, keeping watch over the sacred places, protecting the dead from those who would disturb their rest. And as long as we respect that, they'll leave us alone. But forget that respect, ignore those warnings, and you might find yourself face to face with something that was old when your ancestors were young. Something that has no patience for the disrespectful and no mercy for those who would desecrate sacred ground. The mountains remember everything, and some things are better left undisturbed. My name is Malachi Ravenwood, and I've been a park ranger in North Carolina's Pisgah National Forest for 19 years. In all that time, I've seen bears attack campers, watched lightning split ancient oaks in half, and pulled more lost hikers off dangerous cliffs than I care to count. But nothing prepared me for what happened at Widow's Peak in November of 1984. People always ask me about the strangest thing I've encountered in these mountains. They expect stories about wild animals or crazy weather. They don't expect what I'm about to tell you. Widow's Peak sits on the highest ridge in my patrol area, about 8 miles up a trail that would challenge even experienced hikers. Most folks never make it that far. The path gets steep and narrow, with loose rocks that can send you tumbling down the mountainside if you're not careful. That's probably for the best. I'd been up there hundreds of times over the years. It's my job to check the old cabin ruins, make sure no one's camping illegally, and keep an eye on the wildlife. The place has always felt different from the rest of the forest. Quieter somehow. Even the birds don't sing much up there. Local folks have stories about the peak, of course. Every mountain in Appalachia has its tales. They say it got its name back in the 1800s, when pioneer women would climb up there to watch for their husbands coming home from long hunting trips or trading journeys. Some of those men never came back. Some of those women never stopped waiting. I never paid much attention to the stories. I'm a practical man. I studied at the seminary for 3 years before I realized God was calling me to serve in a different way. These mountains taught me that nature has its own mysteries, but they're usually things you can explain if you know enough about weather patterns, animal behavior, and geology. The crying sounds people claim to hear up there? Just wind blowing through the rock formations. The cold spots? Mountain air gets trapped in certain areas. The feeling of being watched? Your mind playing tricks when you're alone in the wilderness. That's what I believed, anyway. The November weather that year was strange. We should have had frost by then, maybe even our first snow. Instead, we were dealing with what old-timers call an Indian summer, warm days that feel stolen from September. It made the forest restless. Animals weren't following their normal patterns. Plants that should have been dormant were still growing. I remember that Tuesday morning when everything started to change. I was drinking coffee in the ranger station when the radio crackled to life. "Malachi, we've got a situation up at Widow's Peak." The voice belonged to Sheriff Tom Bradley, and he sounded tired. "Need you to meet me at the trailhead." "What kind of situation, Tom?" 3 hikers, all dead, no obvious cause. I set down my coffee cup harder than I meant to. "Dead how?" "That's what we need to figure out." The hike up to Widow's Peak usually takes about 3 hours, but Tom and I made it in 2. We found the bodies near the old cabin ruins, arranged in a rough circle like they'd been sitting around a campfire. But there was no fire, no obvious injuries, no signs of violence. All 3 were experienced hikers. I recognized one of them, a guy named Pete Morrison, who'd been coming to these mountains for 15 years. He knew every trail, every dangerous spot, every place where the weather could turn deadly in minutes. "Medical examiner's on his way up," Tom said, crouching next to the nearest body. "But I wanted you to take a look first. You know this place better than anyone." I walked around the scene, looking for anything that might explain what happened. The hikers' gear was neatly arranged. Their tent was properly set up. Food was still hanging in a bear bag, untouched. Everything looked normal, except for the expressions on their faces. They looked terrified. Not surprised, not shocked, terrified. Like they'd seen something that froze their blood before they died. "Tom," I said quietly, "look at their eyes." He did, and I watched his face go pale. All 3 hikers were staring in the same direction, toward the edge of the cliff where the land dropped away into nothing. That's when I noticed how cold it was getting. The temperature had dropped at least 20 degrees since we'd arrived, and the sun was still shining. Fog was starting to roll in from the valley below, thick and gray and moving faster than it should. "We need to get the medical examiner up here quickly," I said. "And then we need to get everyone off this mountain." But even as I said it, I knew it was already too late. The medical examiner, Dr. Sarah Chen, arrived with 2 assistants just as the fog reached the peak. She was a no-nonsense woman who'd seen every kind of death the mountains could deliver, but even she seemed unsettled by what she found. "No obvious trauma," she said after examining the first body. "No signs of poisoning, no evidence of disease. Heart stopped, but I can't tell you why." I helped her team document the scene while Tom tried to reach the sheriff's office on his radio. The fog was getting thicker, making everything look ghostly and strange. The temperature kept dropping. "Malachi," one of Dr. Chen's assistants called out. His name was Kevin, and he was pointing his camera toward the tree line. "I'm getting some weird readings on the equipment." I walked over to look. The digital camera's display was showing shapes that shouldn't be there. Tall, thin figures standing among the trees. But when I looked with my naked eyes, I saw nothing. "Equipment malfunction," Dr. Chen said. But she sounded like she was trying to convince herself. That's when we heard the crying. It started soft, like wind through leaves, but gradually got louder. It was definitely a woman's voice, full of sadness and pain. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Where's that coming from?" Kevin whispered. Tom had stopped trying to use his radio. He was standing perfectly still, listening. "I've heard stories about this place," he said quietly. "Never believed them before." The crying got louder, and now we could hear words mixed in with the sobs. "Help me, please. Where are they? Come back to me." "Doctor." Chen was trying to work, but her hands were shaking. "We need to finish here and get down the mountain," she said. "This fog is getting dangerous." But the fog wasn't just getting thicker, it was getting colder. Our breath was coming out in white puffs, and ice was starting to form on the rocks around us. That's when Kevin collapsed. He just dropped to his knees like someone had hit him with a hammer. His camera fell and cracked against a rock. When Tom and I reached him, Kevin was staring at something we couldn't see. "She's so sad," he whispered. "She's been waiting so long." "Doctor." Chen knelt beside him, checking his pulse. "Kevin, look at me. What do you see?" "The lady in white. She's standing right there." He pointed toward the cliff edge. "She wants us to come with her. She says her husband is waiting down there." I looked where he was pointing and saw nothing but fog and rocks. But the temperature dropped another 10 degrees, and now I could see our equipment starting to malfunction. The radio was picking up voices, speaking in a language I didn't recognize. "Doctor." Chen's medical instruments were giving impossible readings. "We're leaving," I said. "Now." But when we turned to head back down the trail, we found our path blocked by fog so thick we couldn't see 3 feet ahead. And the crying was getting closer. Kevin stood up suddenly, his eyes fixed on something none of us could see. "She says she's been alone for so long. She says we don't have to be alone anymore." He started walking toward the cliff. Tom grabbed his arm, but Kevin was stronger than he looked. "She's beautiful," he said dreamily. "She just wants us to jump. It's not far. Her husband is waiting at the bottom." That's when I realized we weren't dealing with mountain weather or equipment problems. We were dealing with something that had been waiting on this peak for over 100 years, something that fed on grief and loneliness, something that had already killed 3 experienced hikers, and now it wanted us. Dr. Chen was backing away from Kevin, her medical bag clutched against her chest. "This isn't possible," she kept saying. "This isn't possible." But Tom was a mountain man, born and raised in these hills. He'd heard the stories from his grandmother, even if he'd never believed them. "Cherokee used to say this place was cursed," he said quietly. "Said there were spirits here that couldn't move on." The crying was right next to us now, so close I could feel breath on my neck. Ice was forming on our clothes, and Kevin was still trying to walk toward the cliff, even with Tom holding his arm. That's when I saw her. Just for a second, in the fog, I caught a glimpse of a woman in a white dress. She was beautiful and terrible at the same time, with long dark hair and eyes full of endless sadness. She was reaching toward Kevin with one pale hand. And behind her, barely visible in the mist, I could see others. Dozens of women in old-fashioned dresses, all crying, all reaching, all waiting for someone who would never come home. "Run!" I whispered. Then I shouted it. "Run!" We ran blind through the fog, crashing through trees and stumbling over rocks. I could hear the women crying behind us, their voices getting louder and more desperate. Tom was dragging Kevin, who kept trying to turn back toward the cliff. Dr. Chen tripped and fell hard. When I helped her up, her face was white with pain. "I think I twisted my ankle," she gasped. The fog was following us, rolling down the mountain like water. Inside it, I could see shapes moving, women in white dresses, always just at the edge of vision. The temperature was still dropping. Our footsteps were crunching on ice that shouldn't exist in November. "There's a cave about half a mile down," I said. "If we can make it there, we might be able to wait this out." But even as I said it, I knew we weren't dealing with weather anymore. This was something else, something that had been building power for over a century. Kevin suddenly broke free from Tom's grip and started running back up the mountain. "I can hear him calling," he shouted. "My dad is calling for me." Tom caught him after 20 yards, but Kevin fought like a wild animal. "Let me go. He's been waiting for me. He's been waiting for so long." That's when I realized what was happening. The spirits weren't just randomly attacking people. They were showing us things, making us see our own dead loved ones. Kevin's father had died in Vietnam when Kevin was just a baby. "Don't listen to them," I told the others. "Whatever they show you, whatever they promise, it's not real." But the crying was getting inside my head too. I started thinking about my brother Marcus, who died in a car accident 10 years ago. I could almost hear his voice in the wind, calling my name. We made it to the cave, but it didn't help. The fog seeped in like smoke, and the temperature kept dropping. Dr. Chen was shivering so hard she could barely speak. Tom was trying to build a fire, but his matches wouldn't light. "Malachi," Kevin said quietly. He was sitting in the back of the cave, staring at something none of us could see. "Do you think they're really dead, the people we've lost?" "Kevin, don't." "Because she says they're not. She says they're just waiting in a different place, and all we have to do is step across." The crying was everywhere now, echoing off the cave walls, and I could see them more clearly, not just the women in white, but other figures too. Men in old-fashioned clothes, children in pioneer dress, all with the same expression of endless waiting. Dr. Chen grabbed my arm. "My daughter," she whispered. "I can see my daughter. She died of cancer 3 years ago. She's right there, asking why I couldn't save her." I closed my eyes, trying to shut out the visions, but I could still hear Marcus calling for me. He sounded so real, so close. All I had to do was follow his voice into the fog. That's when I remembered my seminary training. Not the theology, but the practical stuff about helping people in crisis. About recognizing when grief was being used as a weapon. "They're not our loved ones," I said firmly. "They're using our memories against us. Our dead are at peace. These things are something else." But Tom was already standing up, his eyes fixed on empty air. "Sarah," he whispered. "My wife Sarah. She says she's been waiting for me." Tom's wife had died of a heart attack 2 years ago. I'd been at the funeral. I'd seen how broken he was. "Tom, that's not Sarah. Sarah wouldn't want this for you." But he was already walking toward the cave entrance, toward the fog and the crying voices. Kevin was following him, and Dr. Chen was struggling to her feet despite her injured ankle. The spirits were getting stronger. I could feel their hunger, their desperate need to not be alone anymore. They'd been trapped on this mountain for over a century, and they were going to keep killing until someone helped them find peace. Or until there was no one left to kill. I was the only one still fighting their influence, but I could feel my resistance weakening. The seminary had taught me about evil, but this wasn't evil exactly. This was grief so pure and powerful it had become its own kind of force. That's when I heard footsteps outside the cave. Real footsteps, not spirit voices. Someone was coming up the mountain. "Hello?" A woman's voice called out. "Is anyone up there? I saw your flashlights from the trail." It was Emma Brightwater, a local guide who knew these mountains as well as I did. She was bringing a group of tourists up for a sunrise hike. "Emma," I shouted, "stay back, don't come up here." But it was too late. The fog was already reaching down the mountain toward her, and the crying voices were getting excited, like predators who'd spotted fresh prey. I had to make a choice. I could try to save my team, who were already halfway lost to the spirits. Or I could try to save Emma and her tourists, who didn't even know what they were walking into. The spirits were crying louder now, and through the cave entrance I could see them clearly, dozens of women in white, all reaching toward the fog with desperate hands. And somewhere in that crowd of the dead, I saw a face I recognized from old photographs in the local history museum. A woman named Mary Catherine Wells, who died on this peak in 1847, waiting for a husband who'd been killed by bandits 50 miles away. She was the first. She was the one who'd started all this. And she was looking right at me. I ran out of the cave and down the mountain, leaving Tom, Kevin, and Dr. Chen behind. I know how that sounds. But Emma had 6 tourists with her, including 2 teenage kids. I couldn't let the spirits take them all. I found Emma's group about a quarter-mile down the trail. They were setting up camp for the night, planning to reach the peak at sunrise. The fog was already starting to reach them. "Emma, you need to get these people out of here right now," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. She looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "Malachi, what are you doing up here? And why do you look like you've seen a ghost?" The irony wasn't lost on me. "There's been an accident at the peak," I said. 3 people are dead, and the conditions are dangerous. You need to head back down immediately." But even as I spoke, the fog was getting thicker around us. The temperature was dropping fast. And I could hear the crying starting again, soft at first but getting louder. One of the teenagers, a girl about 16, suddenly stopped packing her gear. "Do you guys hear that?" she asked. "It sounds like someone's crying." "Just wind through the rocks," Emma said, but she was looking around nervously. The girl took a step toward the fog. "It sounds like my mom, but that's impossible. My mom died last year." That's when I knew we were all in serious trouble. I grabbed the girl's arm. "Listen to me very carefully. Whatever you think you hear, it's not your mother. Your mother is at peace. This is something else, something that feeds on our grief." But the crying was getting louder, and now the other tourists were starting to hear it too. An older man was staring into the fog with tears in his eyes. "Dad?" he whispered. "Is that really you?" Emma was trying to maintain control of her group, but I could see the confusion and fear in her face. "Malachi, what's really going on up here?" Before I could answer, the fog reached us completely. The temperature dropped so fast that ice started forming on our clothes and equipment, and through the mist, I could see them coming, dozens of figures in white, moving down the mountain toward us. The teenage girl broke free from my grip and started walking into the fog. "Mom, I'm coming, Mom." I tackled her, and we both went down hard on the rocky trail. She fought me like a wild animal, screaming for her mother. The other tourists were starting to move toward the fog too, their eyes fixed on things only they could see. That's when Emma grabbed my shoulder. "The Cherokee elder," she said urgently. "My grandmother always said if the spirits ever came back, we needed to find Joseph Crowfeather." Joseph Crowfeather lived in a cabin about 2 miles down the mountain. He was in his 80s, but he knew the old stories better than anyone. More importantly, he knew the old ways of dealing with restless spirits. "Can you find him in this fog?" I asked. "I can try, but what about them?" She gestured to the tourists, who were all walking slowly toward the cliff now, drawn by voices only they could hear. I looked at the group, 9 people total, including 2 kids. Then I looked up the mountain, where Tom, Kevin, and Dr. Chen were probably already dead or dying. The spirits were getting stronger with each person they claimed. "Take 2 of the stronger hikers and go find Joseph," I said. "I'll try to hold the others here." But even as I said it, I knew it was hopeless. I was just one man against forces that had been building power for over a century. The best I could do was slow them down. Emma picked the 2 most experienced hikers and disappeared into the fog. I was left with 6 tourists who were all slowly walking toward their deaths, hypnotized by the voices of their dead loved ones. That's when I remembered something from my seminary days. A priest had once told me that the most powerful prayer wasn't asking God for help. It was offering to help others, even at the cost of your own life. I started talking to the spirits. "Mary Catherine Wells," I called out. "I know who you are. I know why you're here." The fog seemed to swirl around me, and the crying got quieter. The tourists stopped walking. "You've been waiting for your husband for over 140 years. But he's not coming back. He died in 1847, killed by bandits on the trading road." A figure materialized in the fog in front of me, a woman in a white dress, with long dark hair and eyes full of endless sadness. Mary Catherine Wells, the first widow of Widow's Peak. "He promised," she said, and her voice was like wind through dead leaves. "He promised he'd come home. I know he did. But sometimes promises get broken. Not because people don't care, but because the certain Sunten dollar day, the world is dangerous and unpredictable. Behind her, I could see the other spirits, dozens of women who died waiting for men who never returned. And mixed in with them now I could see Tom, Kevin, and Dr. Chen, their faces pale and their eyes empty. "You don't have to keep waiting," I told Mary Catherine, "and you don't have to make others wait with you." But she shook her head. "Alone is too hard. Alone is too cold." That's when I understood. These spirits weren't evil, they were just lonely and heartbroken. They'd been feeding on the grief of others because their own pain was too much to bear alone. "You're right," I said. "Alone is too hard. But this isn't the way to fix it." I could hear Emma coming back up the mountain with Joseph Crow Feather, but I could also feel the spirits getting ready to strike, to pull me and the remaining tourists into their eternal vigil. I had one chance to end this before more people died. "Mary Catherine," I said, "let me help you find him." Joseph Crow Feather arrived just as the spirits were reaching for me. He was a small, elderly man, but he carried himself with the authority of someone who dealt with forces beyond the physical world. "You cannot bargain with grief," he told me quietly, "but you can help it find peace." He began to chant in Cherokee, words I didn't understand but could feel in my bones. The fog started to thin, and the temperature began to rise. The spirits became more solid, more visible. "They need to know their loved ones are safe," Joseph explained as he worked. "They need to be shown the way across." The ceremony took 4 hours. Joseph sang and burned sage and cedar, calling on his ancestors to help guide the lost spirits home. I held the line, keeping the tourists calm and safe while the ritual played out. Slowly, one by one, the spirits began to fade. But Mary Catherine Wells was the last to go. "Will you tell people about us?" she asked me. "Will you, to make sure we're not forgotten?" "I promise," I said. She smiled then, and for a moment she looked young and happy instead of sad and haunting. "Thank you." Then she was gone, and the fog lifted, and the November warmth returned to the mountain. We found Tom, Kevin, and Dr. Chen near the cliff edge, unconscious but alive. They had no memory of what happened after we entered the cave. The official report listed the incident as severe altitude sickness and temporary disorientation caused by unusual weather conditions. I left the Park Service 6 months later. The nightmares were too much, and I couldn't stop thinking about all the people who died on that mountain over the years. But I didn't leave the mountains entirely. I became a grief counselor, working with families who'd lost loved ones in hiking accidents and climbing mishaps. I helped them understand that letting go doesn't mean forgetting, and that moving on doesn't mean leaving our dead behind. I still go up to Widow's Peak sometimes, usually on the anniversary of Mary Catherine's death. The crying has stopped, but the place still feels different from the rest of the forest. Quieter, more peaceful. But sometimes, on warm November nights when the fog rolls in from the valley, I can still hear whispers in the wind. Not crying anymore, but something else. Gratitude, maybe. Or just the mountain itself, remembering what it once held. Emma still runs hiking tours, but she doesn't take groups to Widow's Peak anymore. Joseph Crow Feather died 2 years after the incident, taking many of the old stories with him. The Cherokee say his spirit helps guide other lost souls to their proper rest. The tourists who were with us that night don't remember much. Dr. Chen transferred to a hospital in Asheville. Tom retired from the sheriff's department and moved to Florida. Kevin became a photographer for National Geographic, though he never takes pictures of mountain peaks anymore. As for me, I learned that some ghosts are just grief that doesn't know how to let go. And sometimes, the best thing you can do for the dead is help the living understand that love doesn't end with death, it just changes form. But I also learned that some places hold on to pain longer than they should, and that the past doesn't always stay buried in these old mountains. That's why I'm telling you this story, because Widow's Peak isn't the only place in Appalachia where the dead still walk. And grief is a powerful force, whether it belongs to the living or the dead. If you ever find yourself on a mountain trail and you hear crying in the wind, don't follow the sound. Don't trust the voices that call your name. And remember that the people you've lost wouldn't want you to join them before your time. They're waiting for you, yes, but they're waiting somewhere else, somewhere better than a lonely peak, where the fog never quite lifts and the crying never quite stops. Sometimes I wonder if I really helped those spirits find peace, or if I just moved them somewhere else. But then I remember Mary Catherine's smile at the end, and I think maybe, just maybe, some stories really do have happy endings. Even the scary ones. My name is Ezekiel Darkwood, and I've been a park ranger for 20 years. People always laugh at my last name, like it's made up for a scary movie. But let me tell you something. After what happened in Bone Church Valley, I wish it was just a joke. I work in Jefferson National Forest in Virginia. My job is simple: protect the old sites that tell our history. Native American burial grounds, Civil War battlefields, old settlements. I've seen it all. Or at least, I thought I had. Before I became a ranger, I was a minister. Preached at a small church for 10 years before I lost my faith. Not in God, mind you, but in people. Too much politics, too much hate disguised as holy words. So I traded my pulpit for hiking boots and found peace in the mountains. The mountains of Appalachia hold secrets. Every ranger knows this. We find old cabins hidden in hollers that maps forgot. Stone circles that nobody remembers building. Sometimes we find bones, usually animals, sometimes people who got lost and never made it home. But I always thought the weird stories were just that, stories. Mountain folk love their tales of haints and devils, snake-handling churches, faith healers, prophets who talk to spirits. I figured if that was the strangest religion got out here, I could handle it. I was wrong. Bone Church Valley sits deep in the forest, hidden behind rock walls that rise up like giant fingers. The valley got its name from an old story about a religious group that lived there in the 1800s. According to local tales, they all vanished one day. Just gone. Left behind a stone church and a lot of questions. The church was built into a natural rock formation, calcium, like someone carved it right out of the mountain. Beautiful work, really. I'd visited it a few times over the years, always gave me the creeps, but I figured that was just the history talking. In June of 1973, everything changed. Dr. Helena Grimshire called me on a Tuesday morning. She was leading an archaeology team from the university, studying old religious sites in the area. Smart woman, knew her history better than anyone. "Ezekiel," she said, her voice excited, "we need access to Bone Church Valley. We've found something incredible." I met her team at the valley entrance that afternoon. 5 people total. Dr. Grimshire, 2 graduate students named Mark and Sarah, a photographer called Jim, and a local historian named Mordecai Grimm. Old Mordecai knew every story, every legend in these mountains. "What exactly did you find?" I asked. Dr. Grimshire's eyes were bright with discovery. "The church has a basement, a whole underground level we never knew existed. The entrance was hidden behind fallen rocks. I followed them down the rocky path into the valley. The summer heat felt different here, thicker, heavier. The trees seemed too quiet. Even the birds didn't sing much in Bone Church Valley. The church looked the same as always from the outside. Gray stone walls covered in moss, empty windows like dead eyes, wooden doors hanging crooked on rusty hinges. But something felt wrong, more wrong than usual. "We cleared the rocks yesterday," Mark said, pointing to a dark opening at the base of the church. "There's a whole room down there, maybe more." I shined my flashlight into the hole. Cool air drifted up from below, carrying a smell I couldn't place. Old and musty, but something else too. Something that made my stomach turn. "When do you want to start the full exploration?" I asked. "Tomorrow," Dr. Grimshire said. "We'll set up camp tonight." I should have said no. Should have made them wait, get more permits, bring more people. But I was curious too. In 20 years of protecting these sites, I'd never found anything like this. As we set up their tents near the tree line, I noticed something odd. The grass around the church was brown and dead, even though it was the middle of summer. A perfect circle of dead earth, maybe 100 yards across. "Probably just the soil," Dr. Grimshire said when I mentioned it. "Rocky ground, poor drainage." But I'd been in these mountains long enough to know when something wasn't natural. The dead zone was too perfect, too clean, like something had poisoned the very ground. That night, I lay in my sleeping bag listening to the wind in the trees. Except there was no wind. The air was perfectly still. So what was making that sound? It almost sounded like voices. We went into the underground chamber first thing the next morning. Doctor. Grimshire led the way with her flashlight, followed by Mark and Sarah. Jim brought his camera equipment, and Mordecai came last, muttering prayers under his breath. I brought up the rear, my ranger instincts on high alert. The stone steps were worn smooth, like thousands of feet had walked them over the years. The walls were carved from solid rock, covered in symbols I'd never seen before. Not Native American, not anything I recognized from my religious studies. "This is incredible, Doctor," Grimshire whispered. Her voice echoed in the narrow passage. "The craftsmanship is extraordinary." The steps went down much further than they should have. The church above wasn't that big, but we descended for at least 50 feet before reaching the bottom. And that's when we found the real church. The underground room was huge, bigger than the building above. A natural cave that someone had turned into a place of worship. Stone pews carved from the cave floor. An altar at the far end, raised up on a platform. But it was what the altar was made of that stopped us cold. Human skulls. Dozens of them, stacked and arranged to form a table. Leg bones for supports. Ribs carved with those same strange symbols, arranged in patterns around the base. "Jesus Christ," Mark whispered. "Don't use that name here," Mordecai said sharply. "This ain't a place for holy words." Jim started taking pictures, his camera flash lighting up the bone altar in stark white bursts. Each flash seemed to make the shadows move wrong, like they were alive. Dr. Grimshire walked closer to examine the altar. "These bones are old, very old, and look at this workmanship. They're not just stacked, they're fitted together like puzzle pieces." I checked my radio. Static. My watch had stopped. The temperature gauge on my pack read 20 degrees colder than it should have been. "We need to document everything, Doctor," Grimshire said. "This could rewrite what we know about religious practices in colonial America." But something was wrong. More wrong than just finding human bones used as furniture. Sarah pointed to the walls. "Dr. Grimshire, look at these carvings." The symbols weren't just carved into the rock, they were burned in. Like someone had used fire or acid to etch them deep into the stone, and they covered every inch of the walls, from floor to ceiling. "It's some kind of language, Doctor," Grimshire said, "but not like anything in my references." Mordecai stayed by the entrance, refusing to come further into the chamber. "This is where they did it," he said. "Where they made their deal." "What deal?" I asked. "The bone worshippers. My great-grandfather told me the stories. They didn't just disappear in 1847. They made a pact with something that ain't human, traded their souls for power." "That's just folklore," Dr. Grimshire said, but her voice wasn't as sure as her words. Jim finished photographing the altar and moved to the walls. "Hey, there's another passage back here," he called. Behind the bone altar, a narrow tunnel led deeper into the mountain. Cool air flowed out of it, carrying that same sick smell I'd noticed the day before. "We'll explore that tomorrow, Doctor," Grimshire decided. "Let's focus on documenting this room first." We spent the rest of the day measuring, photographing, and taking notes. But the longer we stayed down, the worse I felt. Like something was watching us, waiting. When we finally climbed back to the surface, the sun was setting. The dead grass around the church looked even more brown, more lifeless than before. "Anyone else feel dizzy?" Sarah asked as we walked back to camp. Mark nodded. "Like being in a car that's spinning." I felt it too. A strange lightness in my head, like the ground wasn't quite solid under my feet. That night, none of us slept well. I woke up around 2 a.m. to the sound of singing. Soft voices drifting across the valley, too far away to make out words but close enough to hear the melody. It was beautiful and terrible at the same time. I unzipped my tent and looked toward the church. Pale light glowed from the windows. But we'd left no lights on. The building had no electricity, no lanterns, nothing that could make that soft, steady glow. I grabbed my flashlight and walked toward the church, my bare feet silent on the dead grass. The closer I got, the clearer the singing became. Multiple voices, men and women, harmonizing in a language I didn't understand. The light was coming from inside the church, but also from below it, from the underground chamber. I reached the front door and pushed it open. The church was empty. No people, no lights. But the singing continued, echoing up from the hole in the floor. I should have woken the others, should have called for backup. Instead, I found myself walking to the opening, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness below. The bone altar was glowing, not with fire or electric light, but with its own pale radiance. The skulls seemed to be watching me, eye sockets dark and endless. And standing around the altar, translucent as morning mist, were the singers. 20 or 30 people in old-fashioned clothes, men in dark suits, women in long dresses, children with hollow eyes, all of them singing that wordless, haunting song. All of them looking right at me. I ran. I didn't tell the team about the singers. Who would believe me? But I watched Dr. Grimshire and the others closely the next morning, looking for signs that they'd seen or heard something too. Mark looked pale and jumpy. Sarah kept glancing over her shoulder. Even practical Dr. Grimshire seemed on edge. Bad dreams? I asked. The strangest thing, she said. I dreamed I was in the underground chamber, but it was full of people. A whole congregation, like a Sunday service. And they were all... She paused. They were all dead. My blood went cold. What were they doing? Praying, but not to God, to something else. Something that whispered back. We went back down into the chamber after breakfast. This time, I brought extra batteries for my flashlight and a backup radio. Neither would work properly once we got underground. The bone altar looked different in daylight. Older somehow. More solid. The symbols carved into the ribs and skull surfaces seemed deeper, more detailed. I want to explore that back tunnel, Dr. Grimshire announced. Mordecai shook his head. That's where it lives. Where what lives? Jim asked. The thing they made their deal with. The Bone Church folks didn't just worship the dead, they worshipped death itself. Fed its souls in exchange for promises. What kind of promises? Sarah asked. Life after death. Power over others. Knowledge of things man ain't supposed to know. Mordecai's voice was grim. But every deal with the devil has a price. Dr. Grimshire ignored him. Mark, Sarah, you stay here and continue documenting. Jim, bring your camera. Ezekiel, I want you with us in case we find more chambers that need protection. The tunnel behind the altar was narrow, barely wide enough for one person. The walls were smooth, polished like glass. Our footsteps echoed strangely, like we were walking through something much larger than a simple cave. After maybe 50 yards, the tunnel opened into another chamber. This one was smaller, but somehow felt more important, more dangerous. The floor was covered in symbols, not carved, but made from bones. Thousands of small bones arranged in complex patterns that hurt to look at directly. They seemed to shift and move when I wasn't focusing on them. Human finger bones. Doctor, Grimshire whispered. And toe bones. This must have taken hundreds of bodies. Jim started taking pictures, but his camera kept malfunctioning. The flash would fire at random or not at all. When it did work, the pictures came out wrong, showing shapes and shadows that weren't there when we looked. In the center of the bone patterns sat a simple wooden chair. Dark wood, worn smooth by use. Stained with something that looked like old blood. The throne, Mordecai breathed. He'd followed us despite his fear. That's where it sits when it comes calling. As if his words were a trigger, the temperature dropped 20 degrees in seconds. Our breath misted in the suddenly cold air. And the bones on the floor began to move. Not dramatically, not like a movie. Just small shifts, tiny adjustments, like puzzle pieces settling into place. But the patterns were changing, forming new shapes, new symbols. We need to leave, I said. Now. But when we turned back toward the tunnel, it was gone. The wall behind us was solid rock, as if the passage had never existed. That's impossible, Dr. Grimshire said. She ran her hands over the smooth stone. We just came through here. Jim was taking pictures frantically now, his camera working perfectly. But when I looked at the display screen, the photos showed things that weren't there. People standing around us. Faces in the shadows. And in every picture, someone was sitting in the wooden chair. The same someone. A tall figure in dark robes, face hidden but unmistakably watching us. Can you see him? Jim asked, his voice shaking. In the pictures? Can you see him watching us? Sarah screamed. She was pointing at the chair, which was no longer empty. A shape sat there, not solid, but not transparent either. Like heat shimmer on summer pavement, but cold instead of warm. The thing in the chair spoke without words. Its voice went straight into our heads, bypassing our ears entirely. Asterisk, welcome to my congregation. Asterisk. Dr. Grimshire stumbled backward. This isn't real. Mass hallucination caused by underground gases, or asterisk. So many years since new souls entered my church. Asterisk, the voice continued. Asterisk. So many years of waiting. Asterisk. The bone patterns on the floor were moving faster now, creating a spiral that led from the entrance to the chair, and we were standing on them. Every step we took followed the pattern, drawing us closer to the seated figure. Asterisk. Each of you will serve. Each of you will join the faithful. Asterisk. Like hell, I said, and pulled out the small Bible I'd carried since my preaching days. The thing in the chair recoiled slightly, its form wavering. Asterisk. A man of God. How delicious. Your faith will make you a powerful servant. Asterisk. I'm nobody's servant. The figure stood. It was tall, much taller than any human, and its robes seemed to be made of shadow itself. Where its face should be was only darkness, and 2 points of pale light that might have been eyes. Asterisk. You all belong to me now. This place is mine. These mountains are mine, and everyone who enters becomes part of my eternal congregation. Asterisk. That's when the real horror began. Mark started walking toward the chair. Not fighting it, not trying to stop, just walking with a peaceful smile on his face, like he was heading to Sunday service. Mark! Sarah grabbed his arm. What are you doing? Going to join them, he said calmly. It's beautiful, Sarah. You'll see. We'll all see. The thing in the shadows laughed, a sound like bones grinding together. Asterisk, one by one, they always come. Faith is such a powerful thing, even faith in darkness. Asterisk, I grabbed Mark's other arm, trying to pull him back. But he was stronger than he should have been, and getting stronger. Something was changing in his eyes. They were getting darker, emptier. Jim dropped his camera and joined Mark, both of them walking steadily toward the dark figure. This is impossible, Doctor. Grimshire kept saying. This is scientifically impossible. Asterisk science, faith. In the end, they are the same thing. Belief in something greater than yourself. Asterisk. The bone patterns were glowing now, giving off that same pale light I'd seen the night before. And in that light, I could see them clearly. The congregation. Dozens of translucent figures standing around the chamber, all facing the chair. All watching us with dead, hungry eyes. Asterisk, welcome to the Bone Church. Asterisk, they whispered in unison. Asterisk, welcome to eternal service. Asterisk, Mark and Jim reached the chair. The dark figure extended its hands toward them, and they began to fade. Mark and Jim were becoming translucent, their solid forms turning to mist before our eyes. But they were still conscious, still aware. Mark turned to look at us, his face peaceful but his eyes terrified. Help me, he whispered, though his lips didn't move. Please, help me. That's when I understood. The congregation wasn't made of willing servants. They were prisoners, trapped souls forced to worship something that fed on human faith and fear. Stop, I shouted at the dark figure. Let them go. Asterisk, they came to my church willingly. They will serve willingly. Asterisk, this isn't your church, I said, pulling out my Bible again. This is God's earth, and you're trespassing. The entity laughed. Asterisk, your God abandoned these mountains long ago. I am the only divine power here now. Asterisk. But something in my words had an effect. The fading process slowed. Mark and Jim solidified slightly, though they remained trapped near the chair. Dr. Grimshire was frantically examining the walls, looking for any exit. Sarah was praying in Spanish, tears streaming down her face. And Mordecai. Old Mordecai was pulling something from his coat pocket. A small wooden cross, worn smooth by generations of handling. My great-grandfather gave this to me, he said. Made from wood taken from the original church, before it was corrupted, before they made their deal. The entity recoiled further. Asterisk, put that away, old man. Asterisk, the Reverend Joshua McKnight, Mordecai continued, holding the cross steady. He was the preacher here before the corruption, before they started worshiping bones and shadows instead of the Lord. Asterisk, that name has no power here. Asterisk, don't it? Mordecai stepped forward. Reverend McKnight cursed this place when he died. said no evil would rest easy in his church, said the light would always find a way back in. The bone patterns on the floor were dimming. The congregation of trapped souls was becoming more solid, more human-looking, and some of them were looking at the dark figure with something other than worship. They were looking at it with anger. That's it, I realized. You're not keeping them here by choice. You're holding them against their will, against the will of the original church. Asterisk, silence. Asterisk, the entity's voice was losing its smooth confidence. It sounded strained, desperate. I opened my Bible to Psalm 23, the most powerful words I knew. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Asterisk, stop. Asterisk, he maketh me to lie down in green pastures. The trapped congregation was becoming more solid with every word. They were remembering who they were, what they'd been before the corruption took hold. He leadeth me beside the still waters. One of the congregation members, a woman in an old-fashioned dress, stepped away from the crowd. She looked at the dark figure with recognition and disgust. Thomas Grimm, she said clearly. I remember you now. You were our preacher. You led us into darkness. More voices joined hers. Thomas Grimm, who sold our souls. Thomas Grimm, who broke his vows. Thomas Grimm, who serves the enemy of all that is holy. The dark figure was shrinking, its imposing height diminishing. The shadow robes were fading, revealing something more human underneath. Asterisk, no. I am beyond human now. I am eternal. I am power. Asterisk, you're Thomas Grimm, I said, understanding flooding through me. The last preacher of this church. You made a deal with something evil and trapped your own congregation here. The entity that had been pretending to be a demon was just a man. A corrupted, twisted man who'd been feeding on trapped souls for over a century, but still just a man. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I continued, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. The wooden cross in Mordecai's hand was glowing now, warm and bright. The congregation of trapped souls was fully solid, fully human again, and they were angry. You promised us eternal life, the woman said to Thomas Grimm. You gave us eternal prison. You used our faith against us, said a man in a dark suit. Made us worship darkness in God's name. They were advancing on their former preacher, and his stolen power was fading with every step they took. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Mark and Jim suddenly snapped back to full solidity, gasping and stumbling away from the chair. The bone patterns on the floor were cracking, falling apart. Thomas Grimm was just a man now, a thin, pale man in rotting clothes, cowering before the souls he'd betrayed. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. The trapped congregation reached their former preacher. There was no violence, no dramatic confrontation. They simply surrounded him, and he began to fade just as Mark and Jim had. But this time, it wasn't into service. It was into nothing at all. His last words were barely a whisper. I only wanted to live forever. The moment Thomas Grimm disappeared, the chamber shook. Cracks appeared in the walls, the wooden chair crumbled to dust, and the tunnel entrance reappeared. Move, I shouted. This whole place is coming down. We ran through the collapsing tunnel as rocks fell around us. The bone altar in the main chamber was cracking apart, skulls rolling across the floor. The carved symbols on the walls were fading, the stone returning to natural rock. We made it to the surface, just as the underground chambers collapsed completely. The stone church above remained standing, but the hole in the floor had sealed itself. The entrance to the bone church was gone forever. The congregation of trapped souls stood in the valley around us, translucent again, but peaceful now, free. One by one, they faded into light and were gone. The official report said carbon monoxide poisoning killed Jim and Mark, some kind of underground gas pocket that we accidentally opened. Dr. Grimshire backed up this story, and so did I. What else could we say? That we'd found the trapped souls of a 19th century congregation and freed them from their corrupted preacher? That we'd defeated a man who'd made a deal with genuine evil and lived for over a century by feeding on human souls? Nobody would believe that. Hell, I barely believe it myself sometimes. But I know what I saw. I know what I felt in that place. The site was sealed off, declared archaeologically insignificant. The university pulled Dr. Grimshire's team, and she never returned to religious site excavation. Last I heard, she was studying pottery shards in New Mexico. Sarah transferred to a different school. Mordecai went back to his books and stories, but he never talked about the Bone Church again. When I asked him about it a few months later, he just shook his head and walked away. I kept working as a ranger, but something had changed. I started paying closer attention to the old sites I protected. Started listening more carefully to the local stories and legends, because I learned something important in that underground chamber. Not all churches serve the same God, and not all faith leads to the light. I still carry my Bible, still believe in good and evil, right and wrong. But I also know that evil can wear the mask of righteousness, can twist faith into something dark and hungry. The dead grass around the Bone Church site grew back within a month. The valley is green and alive again, the way it should be. Birds sing there now. Animals graze in the meadow where nothing would grow before. But I still don't like going there alone. Sometimes, on quiet summer evenings, I think I can hear singing drifting across the mountains. Not the twisted harmonies of trapped souls, but something clean and pure. Free voices raised in genuine praise. I hope that's what it is. I hope Thomas Grimm's congregation found their way to the light they'd been seeking for so long. But I also know that other places exist in these mountains. Other sites where faith went wrong, where deals were made with things that shouldn't be bargained with. I've found 3 more since 1973. Different locations, different stories, but the same underlying corruption. The same misuse of human faith and trust. Each time, I've known what to do. The Bible helps. Holy symbols help. But mostly, it's about remembering that real faith isn't about power or control or living forever. Real faith is about serving something greater than yourself. Something that asks for love, not worship. Something that offers hope, not promises. And real faith doesn't trap people in darkness. It sets them free. Last week, a new archaeological team called about another old church site they'd found, deep in the mountains, hidden in a valley that doesn't appear on modern maps. They want a ranger escort for their preliminary survey. I told them I'd be happy to help. After all, somebody has to make sure the light finds its way back into these dark places. Somebody has to stand guard against the bone churches. My name is Obadiah Nightshade, and I've been wearing a badge in these mountains for 17 years. Started as a deputy sheriff when I was 27, fresh out of the army and full of ideas about right and wrong. Now I'm 44, got gray in my beard, and I know the mountains keep their own kind of justice. I work for the federal government now, hunting down the bad guys who think these hills will hide their crimes. Drug runners, moonshiners, gun smugglers, they all think the same thing. They think if they go deep enough into the hollers, nobody will find them. They're usually wrong about that. I've made over 200 arrests in these woods, and I know every trail, every cave, every place a man might try to disappear. October of 1978 was different though. The leaves were turning, and there was something in the air that made even the old-timers nervous. They called it a bad moon coming, and they wouldn't go into certain parts of the forest after dark. I figured it was just mountain talk. These folks love their ghost stories and old Cherokee legends. Moonshine Hollow sits deep in the Nantahala National Forest, about 30 miles from the nearest road. It's a place where the mountains fold in on themselves, creating hidden valleys that never see much sunlight. The Cherokee used to call it sacred ground, but these days it's mostly known for one thing: illegal whiskey. For months, we'd been tracking a moonshine operation running out of the hollow. Big operation too. Not some weekend hobby distiller. They were moving hundreds of gallons a week, selling to dealers as far away as Atlanta. My informants told me the leader went by Mountain Mike, and his crew was dangerous. Armed, organized, and mean enough to shoot first if they thought you were law enforcement. I'd been planning a raid for weeks, waiting for the right moment. Federal agents don't go into places like Moonshine Hollow alone, not if they want to come back out. My partner she's supposed to be Agent Maria Bloodmoon from the DEA. She was Cherokee herself, grew up in these mountains before going to college and joining the government. Smart as a whip and tougher than most men I knew. The plan was simple. We'd hike in before dawn, set up surveillance, and call for backup once we confirmed the operation was still active. Standard procedure for this kind of bust. I'd done it dozens of times before. But when I got to our meeting point that morning, Maria wasn't there. Her truck was parked where it should be, but she was nowhere to be found. I waited an hour, then 2. Finally, I decided to check the hollow myself. Maybe she'd gone ahead to scout, though that wasn't like her. The trail down into Moonshine Hollow winds between massive oak trees and over rocks worn smooth by thousands of years of rain. About halfway down, I started noticing things that didn't sit right. Animal tracks in the mud, but wrong somehow. They looked like wolf prints, except wolves had been gone from these mountains for 50 years. And they were huge, bigger than any wolf I'd ever heard of. The forest was too quiet. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering. Even the insects seemed to have gone silent. In 17 years of walking these woods, I'd never heard such complete quiet. It made my skin crawl. When I reached the bottom of the hollow, I found something that stopped me cold. The moonshine operation was there, all right. Copper stills, fermentation tanks, cases of mason jars ready for shipping, but it was completely abandoned. Not abandoned like they'd heard we were coming and ran. Abandoned like they'd left in the middle of the night and never looked back. Coffee was still sitting in cups, gone cold but not moldy. A pot of beans sat on a camp stove, burned black on the bottom. Sleeping bags were scattered around like people had jumped out of them and run. And there was something else. A smell I couldn't quite place, like wet dog and something. Rotten. That's when I saw the first set of tracks. The tracks started near the biggest still and led off into the trees. Human footprints, size 10 boots from the look of them. Normal enough, except for what happened about 20 yards into the forest. The boot prints just stopped. And in their place were those massive wolf tracks I'd seen on the trail. I'd been a tracker since I was a kid. Learned from my grandfather who learned from the Cherokee. You don't just lose human tracks and find animal tracks in the exact same spot. But there they were, clear as day in the soft mountain mud. I followed the wolf tracks for maybe 100 yards before they disappeared onto rocky ground. By then, I was starting to feel like something was watching me. You know that feeling when the hair on your neck stands up and you want to look over your shoulder every few seconds? I'd felt it before, usually right before finding myself face to face with armed criminals. But this felt different, hungrier. I radioed back to headquarters, told them about the abandoned operation. Sheriff Coleman's voice crackled through the static, telling me to secure the site and wait for backup. Standard procedure. But when I tried to call for Maria, all I got was static, filled with what sounded like howling. Probably just interference from the mountains, but it made my teeth itch. That's when I heard the scream. It came from deeper in the hollow, past where the creek bends around a stand of old pine trees. Human scream, full of terror and pain. I'd heard men scream before, in the army, during arrests gone wrong. This was different. This was the sound of someone who knew they were about to die. I ran toward the sound, crashing through underbrush and jumping over fallen logs. My service weapon was in my hand before I even realized I'd drawn it. 17 years of training kicked in, but my heart was hammering like I was a rookie on his first day. I found him near the creek, or what was left of him. Blackjack Harper was a local I'd arrested twice before for small-time moonshining. Skinny mountain man with bad teeth and worse hygiene, but harmless enough. Now he was curled up against a boulder, alive but torn up bad. Long cuts across his chest and arms, like he'd been mauled by something with claws. His clothes were shredded, and his eyes were wide with shock. Blackjack. I knelt down beside him, checking for major bleeding. What happened? Who did this to you? He grabbed my arm with a grip that surprised me. For a skinny guy, he was strong. They ain't human, he whispered. They look like us, but they ain't. They change, Ranger. Right in front of your eyes, they change. Who changes? The other moonshiners? Started 3 days ago. Mountain Mike, he made some kind of deal. Said we'd never have to worry about the law again, never have to run from nobody. But the price. He shuddered, and fresh blood seeped from his wounds. The price was too high. I pressed my shirt against the worst of his cuts, trying to stop the bleeding. What kind of deal, Blackjack? Deal with who? Cherokee spirits, he said. Old magic from before the white man came. But it weren't Cherokee spirits, Ranger. It was something else, something hungry. Before I could ask more questions, we heard it. A howl echoing through the hollow, long and mournful. But underneath the animal sound was something else. something that sounded almost like human laughter. Blackjack tried to get up, panic filling his eyes. "They're coming back. You gotta get out of here, Ranger. You gotta run. I'm not leaving you." I helped him to his feet, letting him lean on my shoulder. "My truck's about 2 miles up the trail. We'll make it." But as we started walking, I noticed the forest had gotten even quieter. The howling stopped, but somehow that was worse. It meant they were hunting now, moving silent through the trees. We made it maybe half a mile before they found us. I saw them first as shadows moving between the trees, keeping pace with us but staying hidden. Too big to be coyotes, too coordinated to be wild animals. They moved like a pack, but there was intelligence in how they spread out, how they cut off our escape routes. "Don't look at them direct," Blackjack whispered. "They don't like that." But I couldn't help myself. When one of them stepped into a patch of sunlight, I saw something that made my rational mind want to shut down. It looked like a wolf, but wrong. Too big, standing almost 4 feet at the shoulder. Its eyes were yellow, but not animal yellow. There was too much intelligence there, too much malice, and when it opened its mouth, showing teeth like ivory daggers, it smiled. Wolves don't smile. That's when I knew Blackjack was right. Whatever these things were, they weren't natural, and they were hunting us for sport. We ran. Training goes out the window when you're face to face with something that shouldn't exist. I'd been in firefights, chased armed fugitives through mountain caves, even been shot at by drug dealers with military weapons. But nothing had prepared me for the sight of that thing smiling at me with too many teeth. Blackjack was slowing me down, but I couldn't leave him. The wounds on his chest were bleeding through my shirt, and he was getting weaker. Behind us, I could hear them keeping pace. Sometimes they'd let out a howl. Sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of gray fur between the trees. They were playing with us, like cats with mice. "There's a cave," Blackjack gasped as we stumbled over a fallen tree. "About a 1/4 mile ahead. Cherokee used it for ceremonies, way back. Might be safe there." I didn't ask why he thought an old cave would keep out a pack of impossible wolves. At that point, I was willing to try anything. We almost made it. I was helping Blackjack climb over a rocky outcrop when one of them got tired of the game. It came out of nowhere, hitting me from the side like a freight train. I went down hard, my gun flying into the bushes. The thing stood over me, and up close I could see things that made my mind reel. Its fur looked normal from a distance, but up close I could see it was wrong. Patches of it looked almost like human skin, pale and covered with scars. Its paws were too long, more like hands with claws than animal feet. And its face, God help me, its face looked almost human around the eyes. It opened its mouth to bite, and I saw something that made me sick. There were fillings in its teeth, gold dental work, like a person would have. Before it could finish me, Blackjack hit it with a tree branch. The thing turned on him with a snarl that sounded like cursing, giving me time to roll away and grab my gun. When I turned back, the creature was changing. I watched its bones stretch and crack, its fur receding to show human skin underneath. In less than 10 seconds, where the wolf had been, there was a man. Naked, scarred, with wild hair and yellow eyes, but definitely human. He looked at me with those terrible eyes and laughed. "You can't stop us, lawmen," he said in a voice like gravel. "We are beyond your laws now." Then he changed back, faster this time. Wolf again, bigger and angrier than before. I shot him 3 times in the chest. The bullets hit. I saw the impacts, but they barely slowed him down. He howled in pain and rage, then melted back into the forest. "The cave," Blackjack said urgently. "We gotta reach the cave." We stumbled the last 100 yards to a crack in the rock face, barely wide enough for a man to squeeze through. Inside was a natural chamber about the size of a small room, with old symbols painted on the walls. Cherokee writing, from the look of it, though I couldn't read it. "What is this place?" I asked, trying to catch my breath. "Sacred site," Blackjack said, collapsing against the back wall. "Cherokee shamans used to come here to talk to spirits. Mountain Mike, he brought us here 3 days ago. Said he'd made a deal with the old powers." "What kind of deal?" "Protection, power. Said we'd never have to fear the law again, never have to run or hide. All we had to do was let the spirits into us, let them share our bodies." He laughed bitterly. "Didn't tell us the spirits were hungry. Didn't tell us they'd want to hunt and kill, use our bodies for things we never would have done." Outside the cave, I could hear them moving around. scratching at the rocks, testing the entrance. But they didn't come in. Something about the place was keeping them out. The symbols, I said, pointing at the painted walls. Their protection? Cherokee magic. Real magic, not the dark stuff Mountain Mike messed with. But it won't hold forever. Come morning, when the sun hits these rocks, the protection will fade. I checked my watch. It was almost midnight. We had maybe 6 hours before dawn. How many of them are there? Started with 8 of us. Mountain Mike, his 3 cousins, and 4 others. But the spirits, they're hungry for more. They'll try to get into other people, spread like a disease. That's when I heard Maria's voice outside the cave. Obadiah? Are you in there? I've been looking for you. My heart jumped. Maria was alive, and she'd found us. But something in Blackjack's face made me hesitate. Don't answer, he whispered. That ain't your partner anymore. Obadiah, I know you can hear me. Maria's voice was right outside the cave entrance now. I found the moonshine operation. These people are dangerous. We need to get out of here. It sounded exactly like her. Same voice, same way of talking. But Blackjack was shaking his head frantically. How do you know it's not her? I whispered. Because I saw what happened to her, he said quietly. They caught her yesterday morning when she came down to scout. Made her, one of them. My blood went cold. You're sure? I watched them do it. 3 of them held her down while Mountain Mike cut her with a special knife, spoke words in the old language. Then the spirit went into her, and she changed, started hunting with them. Outside, Maria's voice was getting impatient. Obadiah, we need to go. There are more of them coming. I wanted to believe it was really her. Maria had been my partner for 2 years. We'd saved each other's lives more than once. But I remembered how that thing had smiled at me with too many teeth. How it had gold fillings like a person. Maria, I called out. If that's really you, tell me what you were wearing the day we arrested Jimmy Sanderson. Silence for a moment. Then, blue jeans and a white shirt. Why does that matter? Wrong. She'd been wearing her green DEA jacket that day because it was raining. I remembered because she'd complained about getting it muddy. Because the real Maria would remember it was raining that day, I said. And she would have told me she was wearing her jacket. The thing outside dropped the pretense. When it spoke again, the voice was different. Still Maria's voice, but with something else underneath it. Something cold and hungry. Smart lawman. But it doesn't matter. We have all night, and you have to come out eventually. Why? I called back. Why are you doing this? Because we can. Because your kind has forgotten the old ways. Forgotten that there are things in these mountains older than your laws. We are reclaiming what was always ours. Blackjack touched my arm. It's not just about territory, he said quietly. They're spreading. Every person they kill, every person they turn, it makes them stronger. Mountain Mike, he didn't understand what he was calling up. He thought he was making a deal with Cherokee spirits, but these things are older, darker. Hours passed. Sometimes we'd hear them outside, testing the barriers, calling to us in voices of people we knew. My sheriff, my ex-wife, even my dead mother. They were good mimics, but not perfect. There was always something off, something that didn't quite ring true. As dawn approached, I started to see light filtering in through the cave entrance. The protection was fading, just like Blackjack had said. There's got to be a way to fight them, I said. They can be hurt, I shot one. Cherokee elders might know. Joseph Spirit Walker. He lives about 10 miles north of here. His family has been fighting dark spirits for generations. Can we reach him? Blackjack was getting weaker. The blood loss was taking its toll. Maybe. But not both of us. I'm slowing you down, and they'll follow my scent. I was about to argue when I heard Maria's voice again, but different this time. Scared human. Obadiah, help me. I'm still in here. It's got control, but I'm still me. Please. This time, it sounded real. The fear, the pain. It was Maria. The real Maria, trapped inside her own body with that thing. Don't listen, Blackjack warned. It's a trick. But I wasn't so sure. If these spirits were possessing people rather than just killing them, maybe the original person was still in there somewhere. Maybe Maria could be saved. The sun was getting brighter. Soon, the cave's protection would be gone completely. I'm going out there, I decided. You'll die. Maybe. But I can't hide in here forever. and I won't leave Maria like that. I checked my gun. 6 bullets left, and I knew from experience they wouldn't do much good. But maybe I didn't need to kill them. Maybe I just needed to get to Joseph's spirit walker. As the last shadows faded from the cave entrance, I stepped outside to face the pack. They were waiting for me in a semicircle around the cave entrance. 7 of them in human form, naked and scarred, their eyes reflecting the morning light like animals. I recognized Mountain Mike from Wanted posters, big man with a gray beard who looked like he could wrestle bears. The others were strangers, but they all had that same hungry look. Maria stood in the center, and seeing her broke my heart. She looked normal except for her eyes, those terrible yellow eyes that belonged to something else. When she spoke, her voice wavered between human and something else. "Obadiah, you came out. Good, we can finish this." "Fight it, Maria," I said. "I know you're still in there." For just a moment, her eyes cleared. "Can't, it's too strong." "But Obadiah, the knife. Mountain Mike has a special knife. It's how they put the spirits in people. Destroy it." Then the thing was back in control, and she snarled at me with inhuman rage. I ran, not away from them, toward Mountain Mike. If Maria was right about the knife, maybe destroying it would help. Maybe it would free her and the others. I tackled him before he could change, and we went down hard. He was stronger than any normal man should be, but I had desperation on my side. We rolled around in the dirt, fighting for the ornate, bone-handled knife on his belt. The others started changing, ready to tear me apart. But something strange happened. As soon as I touched the knife, they hesitated. It hurt them somehow, just being near it. Mountain Mike's eyes went wide. "You can't," he gasped. "You don't understand what you'll unleash." "What do you mean?" "The spirits. The knife is what keeps them bound to us. Break it, and they'll be free to possess anyone, everyone. At least this way, they're contained." I hesitated. Was he telling the truth, or was this another trick? That's when Blackjack stumbled out of the cave. He was dying. I could see it in his face, but he was determined to help. "He's lying," Blackjack said weakly. "The knife is what binds them to this world. Destroy it, and they go back where they came from." Mountain Mike snarled and tried to grab the bowl, knife back. In the struggle, the blade cut my palm, and my blood dripped onto the bone handle. Everything changed. Suddenly I could feel them, the spirits, writhing and angry inside the possessed men and women. And I could feel something else. The knife was a door, a way for the spirits to enter our world. But it was also their weakness. I raised the knife above my head and brought it down hard on a rock. The bone handle shattered like glass. The scream that followed wasn't human. It came from all 7 of them at once, a sound of rage and terror that made my ears ring. One by one, they collapsed to the ground, the yellow light fading from their eyes. Maria was the last to fall. As the spirit left her, she looked at me with her real eyes. Brown, kind, human. "Thank you," she whispered, and then she was gone. The spirits were gone too, I could feel it. Banished back to whatever dark place they'd come from. But the cost was too high. Maria and the others were dead, not possessed anymore, but dead. The spirits had used up their bodies, burned them out from the inside. Only Mountain Mike survived, and he was broken. When I arrested him 3 days later, he kept talking about voices in his head, about things that wanted to come back. The doctors said it was trauma from whatever had happened in the hollow. I never told them the truth. Blackjack died that morning, but not before Joseph's spirit walker arrived. The old Cherokee man took one look at the broken knife and nodded. "The old hungers," he said simply. "They are always trying to come back. You did well to stop them." "But for how long?" I asked. He just looked at me with ancient eyes. "Long enough, maybe forever, if people remember to respect the old places, the old warnings." That was 47 years ago. I'm retired now, but I still live in these mountains. Still keep an eye on places like Moonshine Hollow, because sometimes, on nights when the moon is full and the wind is just right, I can hear them calling. The spirits are still out there, waiting for someone foolish enough to open the door again. And there's always someone who thinks they can make a deal with forces beyond their understanding. So if you ever find yourself in the deep mountains, and you come across old Cherokee symbols or sacred sites, remember this story. Some doors should never be opened. Some bargains should never be made, and if you hear howling in the night that sounds too much like human laughter, well, maybe it's time to head back to town. The mountains keep their own kind of justice, and sometimes justice has teeth.